Chapter 1487. Great Emperor Chu Yun's words enlightened the Sage Master. As it turned out, Great Emperor Chu Yun wasn't truly magnanimous, nor was he a wise ruler who treated his subjects with respect. He wanted to act like he was thirsty for talents to win the praise and respect of the empire's citizens. This was for the common people of the world to see, and also for divine Lord Taihao to see. The Sage Master understood and didn't say anything else. He accompanied Great Emperor Chu Yun out of the study and hurriedly summoned a group of palace guards. They carried a luxurious dragon carriage and escorted Great Emperor Chu Yun out of the palace. About an hour later, the dragon carriage arrived outside Ji Tianxing's residence. Great Emperor Chu Yun took advantage of the night to meet Ji Tianxing. He didn't set up any ceremonial guards and didn't cause any commotion. He seemed to be very low-key. However, everyone knew that the secret agents of the various factions would soon receive the news. This news would spread throughout the city tomorrow. At that time, the citizens would definitely secretly discuss this matter and praise the sacred emperor. Great Emperor Chu Yun walked down from the dragon carriage and ordered the palace guards to guard the courtyard entrance. He only brought the Sage Master with him. He stepped into the courtyard and stood still. The Sage Master held the golden book and brush in his hands and said with a dignified expression, "Ji Tianxing, the sacred emperor has personally come. Why aren't you coming out to welcome him?" In the bedroom, Ji Tianxing was still sitting on the bed, but his eyes were already open. He frowned and thought to himself with a strange expression, "This Great Emperor Chu Yun actually came to see me personally? If he isn't loyal, then he's a traitor." He could guess why Great Emperor Chu Yun had personally come to see him. It was most likely a show of effort on the surface, taking the opportunity to show his tolerance and desire for talent. Since Great Emperor Chu Yun had personally come, he had to meet him no matter what. Otherwise, he would be too arrogant. At that time, even if Great Emperor Chu Yun wanted to execute him, no one would sympathize with him. Thus, he got up and walked out of the bedroom. He tidied his clothes and walked to the courtyard. Ji Tianxing greets the sacred emperor and Sage Master. He calmly cupped his hands and greeted the great emperor of the Chu Yun Empire and the sacred master. "You may rise." Great Emperor Chu Yun nodded slightly and led the Sage Master to the main seat in the living room. Ji Tianxing followed him into the living room and sat down on a chair on the left. Great Emperor Chu Yun looked at him with burning eyes and said sternly, "Ji Tianxing, you should know why I'm here, right?" "I don't quite understand." "Please enlighten me, Saint Emperor." Ji Tianxing shook his head and calmly replied. Great Emperor Chu Yun's lips curled into a playful smile as he said in a dignified tone, "There's only me, the Saint Master, and you here. There's no need to play dumb. Let me be frank. Where did you come from? What is your background? Why did you enter the imperial city and interfere with the god disciples' ranking battle? What is your purpose?" With that, he waved his hand and shot out a dark golden light that enveloped the entire house. In this way, no one could find out what was going on in the house or hear their conversation. Ji Tianxing had expected that Great Emperor Chu Yun would question him about this. He calmly explained, "You may not believe me, Saint Emperor, but I'm telling the truth. A year ago, I woke up in a desolate mountain range. I was seriously injured and had lost all my memories. I didn't know where I came from or where I was going. After I recovered, I walked out of the mountain range and came to the Chu Yun Empire to familiarize myself with the environment. One day, I accidentally heard about the god disciples' selection and learned about the legend of the Clear Sky Pagoda. I don't know why, but an obsession emerged from the depths of my soul. I wanted to participate in the god disciples' selection and return to the Clear Sky Pagoda no matter what." Great Emperor Chu Yun and the Sage Master looked at him expressionlessly and listened to his story quietly. When they heard this, their expressions changed and they frowned at the same time. "What? Return to the Clear Sky Pagoda? Ji Tianxing, what do you mean? Do you have some relationship with the Clear Sky Pagoda?" Ji Tianxing appropriately revealed a blank expression. He calmly shook his head and said with a confused look, "I don't know what's going on either. I racked my brains for a long time, but unfortunately, my memory is blank. I can't remember the past at all. I only know that the 3 words Clear Sky Pagoda made me feel close and warm from the bottom of my soul. It seemed to be related to me in the past. Great Emperor Chu Yun and the Sage Master frowned and narrowed their eyes. An imperceptible shock and a trace of suspicion flashed across their eyes. The two looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. The Sage Master secretly used his divine sense to check Ji Tianxing's divine sense to see if he was lying. Great Emperor Chu Yun stared at Ji Tianxing with burning eyes and said in a dignified tone, "Ji Tianxing, what you've said is simply too inconceivable and unbelievable. You should know very well what the Clear Sky Pagoda means. It's the sacred place of martial arts in the divine nation of Taihao, the place where divine Lord Taihao preaches. If what you said is true, I will let you leave safely and follow the divine envoy to the Clear Sky Pagoda. If you dare to fabricate lies, I will definitely sentence you to death and destroy your soul." Great Emperor Chu Yun shouted angrily and released a terrifying martial sage aura that suppressed Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's body suddenly shook, and his face turned pale. His whole body trembled, and cold sweat dripped down his back. However, he endured the terrifying suppressive power and stared at Great Emperor Chu Yun with clear eyes. He said firmly, "Saint Emperor, I am not lying at all. If you don't believe me, you can send a message to the Clear Sky Pagoda and ask for the details." Great Emperor Chu Yun did not speak. He stared at him sharply and observed the subtle changes in his expression. After a long while, he withdrew his terrifying martial sage aura and a playful smile appeared on his face. "Ha ha ha. If that's the case, I will believe you this time and allow you to leave the nation and go to the Clear Sky Pagoda. I also hope that you can recover your memory soon and figure out your identity and origin. When that time comes, don't forget the kindness I have shown the Chu Yun Empire." Ji Tianxing lowered his head and panted silently. He did not reply. Great Emperor Chu Yun glanced at the Sage Master and saw him nodding slightly. He then got up and walked to the door. "Rest here for the next few days. Remember to go to the city square 7 days later and welcome the arrival of the Clear Sky Pagoda's emissary." When he finished speaking, he had already led the Sage Master out of the house and boarded the luxurious dragon carriage. Soon, the palace guards carried the dragon carriage and left the house quickly, disappearing into the night. Ji Tianxing slowly raised his head and looked coldly at the entrance of the house. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "Fortunately, I was prepared and made up the story in advance. That was how I was able to fool Great Emperor Chu Yun." Chapter 1488. Before participating in the ranking battle, Ji Tianxing spent 3 days preparing. He found out that the Great Emperor of the Chu Yun Empire was a hypocrite who was eager for quick success. He also knew that the Clear Sky Pagoda's status was sacred and unattainable. Even the Great Emperor of the Chu Yun Empire would not go to the Clear Sky Pagoda to investigate the truth. That was why he dared to fabricate an amnesia story. He used this story to hint to the Great Emperor of the Chu Yun Empire that he was somehow related to the Clear Sky Pagoda. If the Great Emperor of the Chu Yun Empire wanted to kill him, he would have to consider the consequences. Moreover, if he went to the Clear Sky Pagoda as the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire, there would only be benefits for the Great Emperor of the Chu Yun Empire. The Great Emperor of the Chu Yun Empire was astute. How could he not understand the stakes? The facts also proved that Ji Tianxing had made the right bet. The situation was just as he expected. After the Great Emperor of the Chu Yun Empire tested him, he did not summon him again. Of course, the spies and experts hiding in the surroundings of the house had never left. They had been secretly monitoring him all this time. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Heavenly Cloud City was still bustling with noise and excitement. The citizens of the city were still discussing the ranking battle. They were immersed in shock and amazement. The streets and alleys were filled with people in groups of 3 to 5. They were all discussing and guessing Ji Tianxing's background. Ji Tianxing's name became known to women and children. He became the center of all the topics. Moreover, there was a rumor that swept through the entire imperial city like a gust of wind. The streets, alleys, houses, taverns, and other places in the city, as long as there were martial artists and citizens gathered, the same conversation was playing out. It said that on the night of the ranking battle, The Holy Emperor sent a guard captain to summon Ji Tianqing to the palace for an audience. However, Ji Tianqing had shut the door on the guard captain and refused to show himself. Not only that, he even arrogantly refused to meet the Saint Emperor. Countless people were shocked when they heard this. Their eyeballs almost fell to the ground. No one dared to believe that the number one genius, Ji Tianqing, was so arrogant that he even dared to defy the Holy Emperor's decree. Isn't this too arrogant? He's simply brainless. Is he not afraid of being hacked to death by the imperial guards for provoking the Saint Emperor like this? Even if he's the number one genius and is about to become the vast Heaven Pagoda's god disciple, he also doesn't have the qualifications to put on airs before a holy emperor. Unbelievable. Is this news true? You didn't make it up, did you? Ji Tianqing must have been sentenced to death by 1,000 cuts, right? However, this was only the first half of the news. The second half of the news was even more shocking and shocked everyone present. Hee. Everyone might not believe it, but not only was Ji Tianqing not executed, he is still alive and well. That night, the Holy Emperor actually brought the Holy Emperor to Ji Tianqing's residence. The Sage Emperor had personally left the palace to meet him, although no one knows what the Sage Emperor said to him. According to the palace guards, the Sage Emperor seemed to be in a good mood. When everyone heard this news, the entire place was silent. Everyone was dumbfounded and completely dumbfounded. When everyone came back to their senses, they opened their eyes wide and cried out in surprise as if they had seen a ghost. Oh my God! This can't be true, right? You. Are you sure you're not joking? Making up stories about the Sage Emperor is punishable by death. This is unbelievable. Ji Tianqing offended the Sage Emperor's dignity. Not only did the Sage Emperor not blame him, he even went to meet him personally. Damn Ji Tianqing, he's too arrogant and rude. Luckily, the Sage Emperor is wise and virtuous and magnanimous, so he forgave Ji Tianqing's crime. Otherwise, he would have been executed long ago. Yes, the Sage Emperor is broad-minded and thirsty for talents. That's why he treated Ji Tianqing so courteously. We are extremely lucky to be able to receive the Sage Emperor's protection. With the Sage Emperor in charge of the empire, why should we worry about not being able to prosper? There will be a day when our empire will become the number one empire. Countless cultivators and commoners came back to their senses and sang praises of the great emperor of the Chu Yun Empire. They worshipped and supported him. As for Ji Tianqing, everyone felt that he was even more mysterious and extraordinary. They were filled with deep respect for him. A young genius who was worthy of the great emperor of the Chu Yun Empire's treatment had not appeared in the past 300 years. How could they not fear and envy him? 2 days later, this news spread out of the imperial city and quickly spread to all the major cities. Most people had the same reaction when they heard this news. Unknowingly, the great emperor of the Chu Yun Empire's reputation became even higher. He also received more support and praise from the commoners. Ji Tianqing also became more legendary. He became the most mysterious martial arts genius in the past 300 years. In the east of the Chu Yun Empire, there was a glacial region that stretched for millions of miles. Under the pale blue glacier were endless majestic mountain ranges. There were many strange peaks and ravines. The terrain and environment here were very special. It was called the Eternal Night Glacier. There was no sunlight here for many years. The sky was always covered by thick haze and clouds. The glacial region with a radius of millions of miles was dark and gloomy. Cold winds howled as if it was eternally sleeping in the night. That was how the Eternal Night Glacier got its name. This was a dangerous forbidden area. It was also the private territory of the Lan family. Without permission, no one was allowed to step into the Eternal Night Glacier. Otherwise, they would die. In the depths of the Eternal Night Glacier, there was a castle with a radius of 5 kilometers on top of a huge ice peak that was tens of thousands of feet tall. The castle was completely built with ice. It looked crystal clear and flickered with a pale blue light. It looked dreamy, like a small kingdom in a world of ice and snow. At this moment, in a secret room in the depths of the castle, a tall figure in a black robe was sitting on a pale blue and blazing white throne. The room was dark and gloomy, and the temperature was extremely low. The figure was covered by a black robe. It covered the figure's body, limbs, and face. It was impossible to tell whether it was a man or a woman. It was also impossible to tell his age and appearance. This person had no aura at all. It was as if he had become one with the ice. There was no sound or temperature. It was very strange. Suddenly, the door of the secret room opened. A middle-aged man in a blue robe walked into the secret room quickly. He knelt on one knee in front of the black-robed figure and bowed respectfully. "My lord, there is new news from the imperial city." From within the black robe, a cold, deathly still, emotionless voice rang out. "Speak." It was impossible to tell if the voice was male or female. It was like two pieces of ice rubbing against each other. It was sharp and ear-piercing. The blue-robed man lowered his head respectfully and reported in a serious tone, "On the night of the ranking battle, the Saint Emperor summoned Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing refused to meet the Saint Emperor and refused to meet him." Chapter 1489. After the blue-robed man reported the news, the secret chamber fell into silence. The black-robed figure was silent for a long time before he said a few words coldly. "He's arrogant. There's something wrong with this." The blue-robed man stood respectfully with his hands by his side and reported in a low voice, "You're right. Judging from that guy's behavior, he has a mysterious background and is very arrogant. With Emperor's temperament and bearing, he would never tolerate such arrogant behavior. But for some reason, Emperor tolerated him and did not intend to pursue the matter. I've sent people to investigate, but they couldn't find out what Emperor had talked about with him. I'm just guessing that the guy really has amazing talent, which is why Emperor thinks so highly of him and treats him so honorably." The black-robed figure was silent for a while before he asked, "Have you found out about that guy's background?" The blue-robed man quickly replied, "I've investigated more than 10 top forces and hundreds of noble families in our country, but I couldn't find any information about him. So far, we've confirmed that he's probably not a citizen of our country. Even if he's from our country, he must be from a poor family with no foundation or background to speak of." When he said this, the blue-robed man's tone was firm and filled with coldness. The black-robed figure was silent for a while before he asked again, "How's Qing'er's situation?" The blue-robed man looked worried and said in a low voice, "Since Miss lost to Ji Tianxing in public, she returned to the villa outside the imperial city and shut herself in. Miss is really angry and she hates him very much. The few maidservants who served her were all injured or killed by her. Even the young master who went to comfort her was injured and thrown out by her. Now, no one dares to go near her." The black-robed figure did not say anything. He was not surprised by this result. The blue-robed man frowned and said in a resentful tone, "Miss has worked hard for decades and endured so much pain and suffering just to make a name for herself in this year's Disciple of God selection. That damned bastard appeared out of nowhere in the ranking battle and took away Miss's title as the #1 genius. He humiliated Miss in public and made her decades of hard work go down the drain. More importantly, they even humiliated our Lan family, and made the other families secretly laugh at us and gloat over our misfortune. Jun Shong, this enmity must be avenged. Not only will it help Miss vent her anger, but it will also show the dignity of our Lan family." After pausing for a while, the blue-robed man continued, "Emperor's attitude towards that guy is very indulgent. He seems to have high hopes and completely gave up on Miss. When that guy enters the Clear Sky Pagoda in the future, he will definitely overshadow Miss's glory and treatment." After the elders in the clan discussed, they all proposed to quietly assassinate that brat before he headed to the vast Heaven Pagoda. Anyway, he has no background in this country. He is like a rootless duckweed. Killing him is pointless." The black-robed figure remained motionless. His tone was cold and emotionless as he said, "Kill, of course we have to kill. Those who block my Lan family's path will die without a doubt. However, this matter cannot be handled by the disciples of the Lan family." The blue-robed man hurriedly nodded and said, "Monarch, this subordinate understands what you mean. Our Lan family's disciples have a special cultivation method, and it's easy to leave behind traces and clues. Emperor thinks very highly of that guy. If we leave any evidence behind, it will inevitably cause a storm. I have thought it through. I will contact the Hidden Killer Pavilion later and let them send assassins to kill him. I guarantee that we can get rid of him successfully. Even if this matter is exposed, Emperor will at most find out that it was done by the hidden killer pavilion. He will definitely not implicate our Lan family. Very good. The black-robed man agreed. Do it quickly. Yes. The blue-robed man bowed and hurriedly left the secret chamber. In an old house in Heavenly Cloud City, Ji Tianxing was still in his bedroom, sitting on the bed with his eyes closed. On the surface, he looked like he was just resting. But in reality, his primordial spirit was slowly circulating and accumulating vast dharmic powers. He was repeatedly sorting out his martial arts foundation in preparation to break through to the 5th level of the primordial spirit realm. Before the battle with the demons, he had reached the 4th level of the primordial spirit realm. In order to deal with the ancestor fiend celestial, he had even used the ancient god's sword array to gather the strength of countless experts, temporarily reaching the peak of the primordial spirit realm. Now, he had reached the limits of the 4th level of the primordial spirit realm. He was just a step away from breaking through to the 5th level. He was not in a hurry to succeed. He raised his strength methodically and wanted to break through naturally. During the process of cultivation, he also used his divine sense to secretly investigate the situation around the house. Within a 5-kilometer radius, there were dozens of streets and tens of thousands of houses. More than 300,000 people lived there. However, he could still clearly detect that there were dozens of spies in the area who were constantly monitoring him. Most of the spies were from the imperial family. Only a few came from other factions. A few days ago, there were more than 1,000 spies secretly monitoring him. It was very messy. Ever since Emperor Tian came personally to find him, the news spread in the city. 90% of the spies of the various factions were withdrawn overnight. After all, Emperor Tian's personal visit was an indication of his attitude. Most factions did not dare offend Emperor Tian. They naturally wanted to avoid arousing suspicion and did not dare to involve themselves in the matter. The spies who dared to continue monitoring him were definitely from the top factions. Ji Tianxing only needed to analyze a little to understand these principles. Although my current situation seems dangerous, it is actually the safest. The various tyrants are watching me. Emperor Tian's men are also monitoring me. No one dares to act rashly. There are still 3 days left before the divine envoy of the Clear Heaven Pagoda arrives. When the time comes, I will leave Heavenly Cloud City with the divine envoy. Everything will be resolved and I will no longer have anything to do with the Outcloud Empire. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he sighed silently in his heart. Yao Yao, where are you? When I enter the Clear Heaven Pagoda, will I receive news of you and see your traces? Unknowingly, it was already midnight. Under the pitch-black curtain of night, the old house was silent. The house's main door and the various rooms were not lit. They slept in the pitch-black darkness. The spies who were secretly monitoring Ji Tianxing relaxed their vigilance when they saw that he had not left his room for several days. No one had entered the house either. Right at this moment, 3 indistinct phantoms appeared in the night sky thousands of meters away. The 3 shadows drilled into the ground and moved stealthily in the depths of the earth. They quietly crept towards the house without causing any sound or aura. A short while later, the 3 shadowy figures snuck into the old house from underground. They spied on the situation in the courtyard. When they saw Ji Tianxing meditating in the room, they simultaneously took out a pitch-black compass and used some kind of secret technique. Swish, swish, swish. Chapter 1490. No one knew what treasures the 3 pitch-black compasses were. However, the cage of black light had sealed off the entire house, making it impossible for anyone to see what was going on inside. Swoosh, swoosh. 2 indistinct shadows emerged from the ground and appeared in Ji Tianxing's bedroom. The 2 of them unleashed their fastest speed and used their most powerful killing moves to attack Ji Tianxing. Swoosh, swoosh. A pitch-black sword radiance and a dark golden saber radiance pierced towards Ji Tianxing's forehead and heart respectively. All of this happened in a split second. It was so fast that no one knew what to do and how to block it. The sword radiance and the saber radiance were about to pierce Ji Tianxing. At this critical moment, he suddenly opened his eyes, revealing a cold and sharp gaze. His entire body lit up with a dazzling golden light, which condensed into a dark golden mana shield. Bam! Bam! The saber radiance and the sword radiance pierced him at the same time, creating two loud, dull sounds. The dark golden dharmic power shield was shattered on the spot, and Ji Tianxing was also sent flying by the terrifying impact. The violent force exploded and hit the surrounding walls. Cracking sounds could be heard as half of the house collapsed from the tremors, sending rubble and tiles flying all over the place. Ji Tianxing fell into the house. His eyes flashed like lightning, and only then did he see his surroundings clearly. He saw that there was a pitch-black void in all directions. It was at least a dozen miles in radius. In this mysterious void, only this house existed. He instantly realized that this pitch-black void must be the domain space of the two assassins. Not only did they want to assassinate him, but they also wanted to do it without anyone noticing. Damn it! The Holy Emperor and the spies of various forces are secretly monitoring this house. Someone actually dares to assassinate me? Ji Tianxing's face was very gloomy. His eyes flashed with cold murderous intent. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, a dazzling cold light suddenly appeared in the pitch-black void behind him. Swish! It was a blazing white sword light that was 10 meters long. It was incomparably sharp and contained an invincible and terrifying might. When the sword light appeared, it was only a few dozen feet away from Ji Tianxing. At such a close distance, he had no time to dodge or block, and was directly pierced by the sword light. Boom! With a muffled explosion, he was sent flying by the sword light and smashed into the half-collapsed house. Dust and gravel flew everywhere, obscuring the sky. The entire house trembled violently. Cracks appeared on the ground, and the house collapsed completely, turning into ruins of bricks and stones. At the same time, a third blurry figure appeared in the dark void. This was a tall and skinny man wearing black leather armor. He wore a black iron mask on his face, revealing only a pair of eyes that were as sharp as swords. Both of his hands were covered in black gloves, and each of them held a black thin sword that was about 4 feet long. After his attack succeeded, he did not take advantage of the situation to attack. His figure turned into nothingness and hid in the void. At this moment, Ji Tianxing flew out from the rubble. Swoosh! He flew above the rubble and stood in midair. His expression was cold as he scanned his surroundings with a sharp gaze. He looked somewhat wretched. There were 2 holes in his white robe, with rags hanging from them. His hair was also a little disheveled. However, he was not injured. There was only a fist-sized dent on his back that was faintly oozing blood. It was the result of the third assassin's attack. He had been stabbed in the back. Thankfully, his body had been tempered to an extreme, and his defense was extremely strong, allowing him to block the strike. Otherwise, the strike would have pierced through his body. He frowned as he looked coldly at the 2 figures 1,000 feet away. There are a total of 3 black-robed assassins. 2 of them are at the 7th firmament essence soul realm. The strongest assassin is hiding in the darkness. He is also the most dangerous. He seems to be at the 8th firmament essence soul realm. Damn it! Who sent the 3 of them? In a short moment of contact, he could tell the strength of the 3 assassins. With his strength, he would definitely not be able to withstand the attacks of the 3 assassins. He might very well lose his life here tonight. At this thought, his expression turned gloomy and his mood turned heavy. Suddenly, the 2 black-robed assassins attacked. In a flash, they appeared in front of him and joined forces to assassinate him. Swoosh! The 2 of them brandished their sabers and swords at the same time, attacking Ji Tianxing from both sides. The assassin on the left brandished his saber and slashed out 9 dark golden saber beams. They sealed off Ji Tianxing's escape route, leaving him with nowhere to run. The assassin on the right unleashed 8 cold beams of light with all his strength, stabbing towards Ji Tianxing's vital points as if they could pierce through everything. The 2 assassins cooperated with each other very well. They were flawless and had no blind spots. Ji Tianxing was caught in a dilemma. He could not dodge and could only use all his strength to resist. Dharma body of heaven and earth. He bellowed with a thunderous voice. Golden light surged out from his body as he pushed his physical defense to the limit. Immediately, a vast and mighty power poured into his body, causing his skin, flesh, and blood to turn a dark gold color, shining brightly. A black light flashed in his palm. He took out the sword of burial of heaven and slashed out more than 10 sword beams. Bam! 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 The blazing white sword beams collided with the incoming saber beams and sword beams. A series of dull sounds rang out. Instantly, all of the sword lights were shattered, exploding into pieces that covered the sky and covered the earth, splashing out in all directions. Only the 9 dark golden saber beams were left. They hit Ji Tianxing hard and drowned his figure. Another dull sound rang out. He was sent flying by the saber beams and smashed into the void thousands of feet away. With his current strength, he was weaker than any of the assassins. There was no way he could withstand the combined attacks of the 2 assassins. However, this was not the most dangerous thing. The truly deadly assassins had been hiding in the dark all along. When he was sent flying, the 3rd black-robed assassin finally appeared. Sky gap flowing light. The skinny black-robed assassin appeared 200 feet away from Ji Tianxing. He waved a pair of thin black swords as fast as lightning and drew out a dazzling white light. That dazzling white sword light was like a bolt of lightning tearing apart the night sky, but also like a streak of light tearing apart the sky. Its power was unparalleled. It seemed to be able to cut through all obstacles and defenses. In just a third of an instant, the dazzling white light arrived in front of Ji Tianxing and was about to hit him. If he was hit by this sword beam, he would be seriously injured even if he did not die. At this critical moment, a golden light suddenly lit up behind him. A pair of dark golden wings appeared. Swoosh! A pair of wide golden wings immediately wrapped around his body, protecting him firmly. Bam! With a dull bang, the white light slashed the golden wings, splashing out a blazing white light that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Chapter 1491. At the edge of the void, there was a pitch-black barrier of light. Ji Tianxing violently crashed into the wall, causing a loud bang sound. When he bounced back, the 3rd assassin's figure had disappeared into the darkness once again. The 2 assassins joined forces and attacked Ji Tianxing together. They were assassins and only wanted to kill their target as soon as possible. They didn't want to waste time and didn't want to engage in a pointless battle of words. Swish swish. In the blink of an eye, the 2 assassins arrived in front of Ji Tianxing. They waved their swords and sabers and attacked him from both sides. In their eyes, it was already a miracle that Ji Tianxing could survive until now. Even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. Under such circumstances, Ji Tianxing definitely wouldn't be able to defend against their attacks. However, just as their attacks were about to land on Ji Tianxing quickly spread his golden wings and slashed out a dazzling sword light with the burial of heaven. Heaven-cleaving sword. He used all of his strength and slashed out a blazing white sword light that was hundreds of meters long. It exploded with an unstoppable force. Only a catcher sound could be heard as the huge sword shattered a few saber lights and fiercely chopped at a black-clothed assassin. The assassin was sent flying. Blood spurted out of his chest and splattered into the dark void. He flew for thousands of meters before landing in the dark void. His body twitched in pain and blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. There was a wound that was about half a foot long on his chest. It was so deep that the bone could be seen. Blood was gushing out of the wound. The other assassin saw that his companion had been injured and his body trembled. He revealed an incredulous expression. Just as he was in a daze, Ji Tianxing used his ultimate technique, God Concealment Step. His figure disappeared into the darkness. His God Concealment Step was more profound and exquisite than the 3 assassins' concealment techniques. The 3 assassins' concealment techniques had to rely on the dark void to be completely hidden. However, there were still some flaws. Ji Tianxing had completely disappeared. Even the aura of his primordial spirit had become difficult to detect. The 3 assassins couldn't detect his tracks at all. They couldn't determine his location. Damn it! This person has also mastered a concealment technique. His concealment technique seems to be even more profound than ours. We can't detect his aura at all, and we can't find any trace of him either. How are we supposed to act? Quick! Use the shadow compass and cast a spell to lock onto his aura. The 3 black-clothed assassins were scattered in the void. They maintained their stealth state vigilantly, secretly communicating with each other through divine sense. The third assassin was the strongest, and his stealth technique was the most exquisite. He hid in the void without moving an inch, waiting for Ji Tianxing to appear again so that he could unleash a thunderous attack. The other two assassins hurriedly cast spells to activate the shadow compass and search for Ji Tianxing's aura. At this moment, a dazzling cold light suddenly shone behind the injured assassin. Piercing sword. Following Ji Tianxing's cold shout, the cold light ruthlessly pierced the black-clothed assassin and exploded inside his body. Boom! A thunderous explosion sounded, and a dazzling white light soared into the sky like a mushroom cloud. The black-clothed assassin's body, as well as his black clothes and soft armor, exploded into pieces that flew in all directions. Crimson blood, mixed with countless pieces of flesh, scattered in the dark void. A ball of dazzling white light flew out from the debris in the sky and hurriedly fled to a dark corner. Damn it! Our intelligence was wrong. This person's strength is even greater than his performance in the arena. That dazzling white light was the origin spirit of the black-clothed assassin. He angrily sent out a divine sense message to warn his two companions. Be careful, I'll retreat first. As he spoke, he quickly escaped from the dark cage and burrowed into the depths of the ground. In just a few breaths, he escaped from the ground and left Ji Tianxing's residence. Ji Tianxing watched the origin spirit escape with his own eyes. He wanted to intercept and kill it, but he was stopped by the other assassin. Only Ji Tianxing and the two assassins were left in the dark cage. The black-clothed assassin at the seventh firmament essence soul realm held a treasured saber in the open. The skinny assassin at the eighth firmament essence soul realm held a pair of thin black swords in his hands. He was still hiding in the dark, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Ji Tianxing and the black-clothed assassin fought intensely in the void. Both of them used all their strength and used all sorts of ultimate moves. Saber flashes and sword shadows filled the sky, manifesting thousands of dharmic radiances as they clashed intensely. Boom! 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 Dull thuds sounded incessantly as violent shockwaves constantly spread, filling the entire dark cage. Ji Tianxing used all sorts of ultimate moves and used the effects of divine concealment steps to force the black-clothed assassin into a retreat. His injuries were constantly worsening. However, the skinny assassin hid in the dark. He would always attack Ji Tianxing at the critical moment in a futile attempt to kill him in one strike. Ji Tianxing could only block and defend, giving up on opportunities to kill the black-clothed assassin time and time again. Both sides fought for about 100 seconds. The black-clothed assassin was covered in injuries, but he did not make a sound. He clenched his teeth and endured. The skinny assassin hiding in the dark also exerted immense pressure on Ji Tianxing. He was covered in 6 new wounds that constantly spewed dark red blood. Finally, Ji Tianxing realized that this could not go on. If he wanted to defeat the two assassins and escape the dark cage, he had to take a risk. Star-shattering fist. He clenched his left hand into a fist and smashed it at the black-clothed assassin, blasting out a massive dark golden fist beam. The black-clothed assassin hurriedly slashed out a myriad of saber flashes to block the fist beam. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to brandish the burial of heaven, stabbing out 4 sword flashes that enveloped the black-clothed assassin's figure. On the surface, it seemed that he had unleashed his strongest strength to severely injure the black-clothed assassin. The skinny assassin hiding in the dark immediately seized this opportunity and rushed to Ji Tianxing's back like a ghost, stabbing out 4 sharp black blades. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The 4 sharp blades were pitch black like ink and cold like ice. Moreover, they were thin, narrow, and extremely sharp. The 4 sharp blades were about to stab Ji Tianxing's head, neck, back, and other vital points. But at this moment, Ji Tianxing suddenly turned around and stared at him with a murderous look. Thunder! Ji Tianxing shouted in a low voice and instantly opened the third eye on his forehead. It released violent thunder and lightning, condensing into a pillar of thunder and lightning. Kaboom! In the earth-shattering explosion, the pillar of thunder and lightning struck the skinny assassin. It also reflected his eyes that were filled with fear. He was instantly sent flying by the thunder and crashed into a dark corner more than 10 miles away. The black leather armor he was wearing was also a powerful defensive artifact, but it was blasted into a pile of black debris by the thunder and lightning. The flesh and blood all over his body were charred and blurry. His body twitched violently, looking particularly miserable. Moreover, his body was in a state of paralysis, and his primordial spirit was also injured. He fell into a temporary state of dizziness, and his consciousness was somewhat fuzzy. Chapter 1492. Heaven-splitting sword. Ji Tianxing roared. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed with all his might. A blazing white sword light that was hundreds of feet long, shrouded in dense lightning, slashed at the skinny assassin. It was only now that the skinny assassin realized that he had fallen into Ji Tianxing's trap. Ji Tianxing was creating a diversion. His real target was him. Seeing the destructive sword light slashing down, he did not hesitate to take out a talisman and cast a spell to detonate it. Boom! A ball of dazzling yellow light exploded, forming a huge mushroom cloud, enveloping his figure and blocking the sword light descending from the sky. With a deafening sound, the earthen yellow light splashed out, illuminating the entire dark prison. The sword light that was hundreds of feet long was also blocked. Its power gradually weakened and finally dissipated in the void. After the light dissipated, the skinny man's figure disappeared. He hid in the void again and silently treated his injuries. Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven and looked around with sharp eyes. At this moment, the black-clothed assassin, who was covered in wounds, suddenly rushed out of the darkness and slashed at his back with his saber. Ji Tianxing frowned. His eyes flashed with a cold light, and his body surged with killing intent. "You're courting death." He suddenly swung the sword of burial of heaven and slashed with all his strength. Cold sea. The icy blue sword light that was hundreds of feet long slashed at the black-clothed assassin and sent him flying. He spat out a mouthful of blood and smashed into the void in the distance. A huge wound appeared on the assassin's waist and abdomen. Blood kept gushing out. Ji Tianxing's figure flashed and chased after him. He swung his left fist and punched. Star-shattering fist. Bam! The black-clothed assassin did not have time to block and was hit by the huge fist. His body that was full of wounds was immediately smashed in half by the fist and was as flat as paper. His body finally could not bear the burden and was destroyed on the spot. Swoosh! A streak of azure light flew out and expanded violently. In the blink of an eye, it became a gigantic beast that was over 1,000 feet tall. This giant ice-blue beast looked like a ferocious giant ape. It had a huge head, long arms, and wide palms and legs. Its entire body was burning with icy blue flames, and its pair of scarlet eyes flashed with an ominous glint as if it wanted to devour someone. Clearly, this was the primordial spirit Dharma power of the black-robed assassin. After his body was destroyed, he didn't choose to run away. Instead, he tried his best to kill Ji Tianxing. Roar! The icy blue giant ape opened its bloody mouth and let out a furious roar. It waved its palms and shot out icy blue light beams toward Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing hurriedly used divine concealment step and quickly teleported away. At the same time, his body lit up with golden light as he summoned his golden primordial spirit sword. Shua! A giant golden sword that was thousands of feet tall appeared in the void behind him, illuminating half of the dark cage. Slash! Ji Tianxing stood proudly in the air. He pinched his fingers together and controlled the giant golden primordial spirit sword to slash at the icy blue giant ape. Bang! Bang! The icy blue light pillars that filled the sky were all shattered, and a series of muffled sounds rang out. The icy blue giant ape wanted to cast another spell, but the golden primordial spirit sword had already slashed its shoulder and sent it flying. A huge gap appeared on its broad and majestic shoulder on the spot, and countless blue light fragments burst out. Slash again! Ji Tianxing waved his right hand, and the golden primordial spirit sword shone even brighter. It slashed at the icy blue giant ape again with even more power. The icy blue giant ape was enraged. It waved its arms desperately, and blue light covered the sky to block the attack of the golden sword. At this time, the skinny man had already treated his injuries. He took the opportunity to attack Ji Tianxing from behind. He waved his sword and shot out 19 black blades. Whoosh! 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 Each black blade contained a cold aura of death. Not only were they extremely sharp, but they could also counter the power of the primordial spirit. He thought that Ji Tianxing's primordial spirit had already flown out, and he was at his weakest. However, he didn't expect that Ji Tianxing was already prepared. Just as the dozens of pitch-black swords were about to pierce Ji Tianxing, a golden light flashed behind his back, and a pair of broad wings wrapped around him. Bang! 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 The black blades hit the golden wings, and a series of muffled sounds rang out. Ji Tianxing's body trembled, and his golden wings flashed with golden light. However, the 19 pitch-black swords were shattered into pieces, and Ji Tianxing was unharmed. The skinny assassin gritted his teeth when he saw this, but he could only hide in the darkness and continue to look for a chance to sneak attack. After a while, Ji Tianxing controlled the golden primordial spirit sword to beat up the icy blue giant ape. Countless wounds and cracks appeared on its body. The icy blue giant ape could collapse at any moment and be completely slain by Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing stood in the void, his aura constantly rising. His dharmic powers were also steadily increasing. He constantly waved his hands and pinched his fingers, controlling the golden primordial spirit sword to attack the icy blue giant ape. Furthermore, he was frantically accumulating his strength, taking the opportunity to break through to the fifth firmament essence soul realm. His white robes fluttered in the wind, and his long hair fluttered in the wind. Around him, dark golden halos lit up one after another, flashing with resplendent brilliance. At that moment, he was no longer as wretched as before, when he was pincered by the 3 assassins. His body was tall and strong, and his aura was domineering. His entire body emanated a powerful and mysterious aura. The icy blue giant ape sensed that his aura was surging. It felt an increasing sense of danger, and it was anxious, but there was nothing it could do. The skinny man hiding in the darkness also noticed something. He immediately revealed a look of shock as he exclaimed inwardly, "Heavens! This darn bastard is trying to break through to the fifth firmament essence soul realm in the middle of battle? How is this possible? How can he be so confident and bold? How can he break through at this moment?" Everyone knew that there was an 80 to 90% chance of failure when a warrior attempted to break through a realm bottleneck. The chances of success on the first try were extremely small. Once the breakthrough failed, they would expend too much dharmic powers and enter a temporary state of weakness. In a weakened state, a warrior would find it difficult to use dharmic powers, leaving them with only 20 to 30% of their combat strength. Therefore, almost all warriors would choose to enter seclusion in a chamber if they wanted to break through to the next realm. It was extremely rare and dangerous for someone like Ji Tianxing to break through in the middle of a dangerous battle. As long as he failed to break through, it was equivalent to certain death. There was no chance of survival. Yet, he had chosen to do so. No. I can't allow him to continue his breakthrough. With his current strength, he can already fight me to a draw. If he succeeds by chance and breaks through to the fifth firmament essence soul realm, I'm afraid I won't be his match. After the skinny man calmed down, he charged at Ji Tianxing without hesitation and attacked with all his might. 10,000 blades in a single strike. He released his most violent dharmic powers as he brandished his sword, sending out cold stars that enveloped Ji Tianxing's figure. Chapter 1493. Swish, swish, swish. Thousands of cold stars rained down from the sky. Even a 100,000-foot-tall mountain would be reduced to ruins by the cold stars, reduced to dust. However, just as the dense cold stars were about to hit Ji Tianxing, they were blocked by the golden wings. Ding, ding, ding. A series of crisp sounds rang out, as though metal had struck metal. The wide pair of golden wings protected Ji Tianxing very tightly. After withstanding thousands of cold stars, the golden wings had lost more than half of their power and had dimmed significantly. Swoosh! The golden wings disappeared and turned into a wide golden cloak that draped over Ji Tianxing's back. He was safe and sound, and his circulation had not been interrupted. His dharmic powers and aura were still rising rapidly, reaching an even higher peak and limit. Seeing this, the skinny assassin was so anxious that he gritted his teeth. The icy blue ape could not be bothered with that. It was already cracking under the onslaught of the golden essence soul sword and was desperately trying to escape. In just 3 short breaths, a strange change occurred. All of a sudden, a muffled sound exploded from Ji Tianqing's body. It sounded like a clap of thunder from the 9 heavens. A dazzling golden light surged out from his body and rushed into the sky. The entire darkness cage was illuminated by the dazzling golden light, revealing every detail. A sacred and mighty aura burst out from his body and spread out in all directions, enveloping a radius of more than 5 kilometers. His flesh and skin shimmered with a dark golden light. His 108,000 pores opened and released a powerful aura. At that moment, he had his eyes closed and his arms wide open with a calm expression, as though he was hugging the sky. His long hair and golden cloak fluttered as his body emitted a sacred golden light. The aura and bearing that belonged to a peerless genius and a supreme expert was perfectly displayed on his body. His strength and aura were more than 3 times stronger than before, becoming as vast and unfathomable as the sea. Upon seeing this scene, the skinny assassin and the icy blue ape were shocked. They found it unbelievable. They could not believe that Ji Tianqing had successfully broken through. In less than 15 minutes, he had broken through the martial Dao bottleneck and reached the 5th firmament essence soul realm. This was simply inconceivable. After coming to their senses, the shock in the hearts of the 2 assassins dissipated, replaced by despair. Despicable little bastard. He actually succeeded. It's over. He has broken through to the 5th firmament essence soul realm and his strength has increased 3-fold. Even I am no match for him. The plan is going to fail. This thought flashed through the thin assassin's mind, and he immediately thought of retreating, and decided to quietly escape. He was an elite assassin who would do anything to complete his mission, including sacrificing the lives of his companions and brothers. However, he would always remember that the most important thing for an assassin was to remain calm and rational. Even though he knew that it was impossible and that his plan was going to fail, he would not sacrifice his life for nothing. After all, he was only an assassin who was ordered to kill, not a loyal and courageous death warrior. Shua. The lean assassin's figure disappeared into the darkness. He quietly retreated to a dark corner, wanting to leave the dark prison. But at that moment, Ji Tianqing opened his eyes and turned to look at him. That pair of deep and boundless pitch-black eyes clearly revealed a disdainful sneer, as well as a dense killing intent. Although the lean assassin was invisible, he felt like he was being stared at by Ji Tianqing, as though he had been seen through. Oh no! His body trembled as his expression changed. He hurriedly sped up to escape to a dark corner. However, it was already too late. Shua. Ji Tianqing's figure flashed as he teleported more than 5 kilometers away. He came to the lean assassin's side and blocked his path. The lean assassin bellowed with a ferocious expression. He frantically brandished his sword, sending out hundreds of sword flashes. Go to hell! Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a contemptuous sneer. He struck out with heaven-capturing palm with his left hand, while his right hand sent out a dazzling cold beam with his sword. Boom! There was a crisp explosion as the dazzling golden heaven-capturing palm collided with the hundreds of sword flashes, shattering into pieces. On the other hand, the cold light from the Heavenpiercer sword pierced through the thin assassin's body and exploded inside his body. Bam! A dazzling cold beam exploded in the dark void, like a mushroom cloud rising into the sky. The lean assassin's body exploded into pieces of flesh and blood that splattered in all directions. In the rain of blood, a black shadow flew out and was about to escape from the dark cage. However, Ji Tianqing had been waiting for his primordial spirit to appear. He hurriedly waved his left hand, sending out a golden divine flame. God-slaying spear. The mysterious and turbulent golden flames instantly condensed into a 10-foot-long golden divine spear. It pierced the black shadow with a loud bang. With a dull explosion, the black shadow was shattered by the golden divine spear. It turned into wisps of black light that dissipated into the void. The lean assassin, who was at the 8th firmament essence soul realm, was killed by Ji Tianqing just like that. In the dark prison, only he and the giant ice snow ape were left. The giant ice snow ape had witnessed the death of the lean assassin with its own eyes. It was scared out of its wits and was filled with despair. When Ji Tianqing flew towards it, It knew that it could not escape and that it would definitely die. Therefore, it wanted to self-detonate its primordial spirit Dharma power. Phew! The giant ice snow ape's body swelled violently as it flashed with blue light. Its aura also became extremely violent and chaotic. Upon seeing this, Ji Tianxing's expression changed as he frowned deeply. He did not hesitate to control the golden sword and split it into tens of thousands of sword flashes. Soul-slaying. The tens of thousands of golden swords formed a huge sword net that enveloped the giant ice snow ape as it tried to kill it. The sword flashes tore through the air and filled the sky with golden flashes. The giant ice snow ape was immediately torn apart by the sword flashes, turning into tens of thousands of pieces. The giant ice snow ape's self-detonation was stopped in time, and its primordial spirit Dharma power was completely destroyed. It was completely dead. The dark prison quietened down as the flashes of light and the intense storm gradually subsided. Ji Tianxing put the golden sword back into his body and held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands as he looked coldly at the edge of the darkness. He slowly raised the sword of burial of heaven as the Dharma power in his body circulated wildly. His aura was also raised to its peak. He wanted to use a sword that could split the heavens and earth to break the seal of the dark prison. However, just as his aura was at its peak and he was about to swing his sword down, bam! A dull sound suddenly came from the darkness in front of him. Ji Tianxing was startled. He furrowed his brows in confusion. Then, there was another muffled bang. A big hole was blasted in the dark cage from the outside. Catcher, shattering sounds could be heard as the huge dark prison quickly disintegrated, turning into black light fragments that dissipated. With a flash of light, Ji Tianxing left the darkness and returned to the ruined house. Before he could take a good look at his surroundings, a familiar voice rang in his ears. Chapter 1494. This voice was filled with astonishment and disbelief. Ji Tianxing subconsciously frowned as he looked towards his left with a cold expression. 20 steps away, a tall and skinny figure wearing a snow-white robe entered his eyes. Without a doubt, this person was Wu Qiu. He held on to the yin-yang umbrella as he looked at Ji Tianxing in astonishment. His eyes shone brightly. Behind him stood two middle-aged men with cold expressions and powerful auras. The two of them had reached the 9th tribulation realm, but they were very respectful towards Wu Qiu as if they were his bodyguards. Ji Tianxing glanced at Wu Qiu as he asked coldly, "Why are you here?" Wu Qiu replied without hesitation, "You were attacked, so this young master naturally had to come and take a look. I didn't expect you to still be alive. This is really surprising." Ji Tianxing stared at him with a sharp gaze as he said in a low voice, "You seem to be a little disappointed that I didn't die." No. Wu Qiu hurriedly waved his hands as he said with a smile, "What are you saying? I can't even wait to be happy. How can I be disappointed? You can't be suspecting that this young master sent someone to assassinate you, right?" Ji Tianxing didn't say anything as he stared at him calmly. Wu Qiu's expression became a little unnatural. He seemed to be a little sullen and angry as he snorted coldly. If this young master sent someone to kill you, why would I appear personally? Wouldn't I be walking right into a trap? With your intelligence and wisdom, how could you not understand such a simple principle?" Ji Tianxing didn't reply as he cupped his hands towards him and said, "Thank you." Wu Qiu was stunned as he immediately stopped trying to defend himself. A warm smile appeared on his face. "That's more like it. At least you have some eyesight." This young master didn't worry for nothing. After saying that, he flew towards the ruins beside Ji Tianxing as he searched around with his sharp eyes. The entire residence had been reduced to rubble and dust. Even the surrounding buildings within 1,000 feet had been destroyed by the shockwave, turning into ruins. Yin Wu Qiu rummaged through the ruins for a while, and he soon found the assassin's corpse, armor fragments, and a few broken pieces of metal. He picked up the broken pieces and carefully observed them for a while before returning to Ji Tianxing's side with a solemn expression. "Young Master Ji, you're in big trouble now." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and looked at him calmly. "What do you mean?" Yin Wu Qiu glanced around and saw that there were many black shadows around. It was obvious that many spies had sensed the abnormality and were secretly observing them. Therefore, He used telepathy to explain to Ji Tianxing, the person who tried to assassinate you should be an assassin from the hidden killer pavilion. Secret killer pavilion? Ji Tianxing looked puzzled as he asked in a low voice, I've never heard of this force. They have no grudges with the hidden assassin pavilion. Could this be an assassin organization? That's right. Yin Wu Qiu nodded and said, they are the strongest assassin organization in our country. They have many strong cultivators, and 1,000 years ago, they even tried to assassinate a martial saint. Hearing his explanation, Ji Tianxing's expression darkened. He said in a cold voice, it seems like someone secretly paid a huge sum of money to hire an assassin from the hidden killer pavilion to assassinate me. That's right. Yin Wu Qiu nodded and said in a playful tone, you've just arrived and have no grudges with the major forces in our country. However, you offended some geniuses during the ranking battle. You must have stolen someone's honor and ruined his future, which is why you're in trouble now. Ji Tianxing immediately recalled the words Lan Yiqing had said before he left the arena after being defeated by him, as well as the look of hatred in his eyes. His expression was cold as he said in a proud tone, I had no intention of blocking anyone's path, and I didn't want to have anything to do with the forces of the Chu Yun Empire. Since that person wants to kill me, then bring it on. What do I have to fear? Yin Wu Qiu looked at him with burning eyes. He sighed and said, young Master Ji, I can't help but admire you. You're really confident and domineering. However, I have to remind you that you can't afford to offend the hidden killer pavilion or that other force. Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a cold smile, but he didn't reply. Yin Wu Qiu saw that he didn't take it to heart, so he hurriedly advised, young Master Ji, you really can't underestimate the hidden killer pavilion and the Lan family. They are the top forces in our country. Although you escaped a calamity tonight and even killed 2 assassins, you were just lucky. You live in the Imperial City and are being watched by the various forces. The hidden killer pavilion sent an Essence Soul Realm assassin to assassinate you in order to hide their actions. After all, once a 9th Tribulation Realm expert approaches this area, his aura will be detected and the Imperial family will be alerted. Only an Essence Soul Realm assassin won't be noticed and will be more convenient to assassinate you. If the hidden killer pavilion sends a 9th Tribulation Realm assassin next time, will you still be able to survive unscathed? Ji Tianxing naturally knew that his analysis was very reasonable. He nodded and said, thank you for the reminder. However, you don't have to worry too much. The hidden killer pavilion's assassination plan has failed. This matter will definitely be known by the Imperial family and the various large forces. In the short term, the hidden killer pavilion and that other force will definitely not dare to act rashly unless they dare to disregard the Sage Emperor's authority. In 3 days, we will leave the Chu Yun Empire and head to the Clear Sky Pagoda. Would they dare to chase us to the Clear Sky Pagoda? Yin Wu Qiu was stunned for a moment, then he nodded slightly in agreement. Not bad, your analysis is very reasonable. However, you still can't let your guard down. You still have to be extra careful in these 3 days. After saying this, he thought for a moment, then said sincerely, young Master Ji, why don't you come back with me and stay for a few days? 3 days later, we will go and meet the divine envoy together. There is a manor in the south of the city. It is my private territory. Other than the Imperial family, no other force will dare to invade. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment, then asked hesitantly, now that I am in the eye of the storm, aren't you afraid of getting into trouble? Yin Wu Qiu revealed a confident smile and said proudly, other than the Imperial family, I am not afraid of the other forces. They also won't dare to offend me easily. As for the Sage Emperor, I will personally explain it to him. You can rest assured. Ji Tianxing nodded and cupped his hands, saying, if that's the case, many thanks. Yin Wu Qiu's smiling face became even more charming. His eyes shone brightly. It was obvious that he was in an extremely good mood. After that, he brought Ji Tianxing and left the ruins. Under the escort of 2 middle-aged guards, they quickly rushed to the south of the city. Their figures disappeared into the night. After everyone left, many experts and secret agents who were hiding in the dark came to the vicinity of the ruins. They quietly investigated the situation. These people found some fragments and quickly left the ruins, disappearing into the darkness. In a short 2 hours, More than 10 groups of secret agents and experts investigated the ruins and found many clues. After 6 hours, a long night had passed and a new day had arrived. Chapter 1495. Although the imperial family and the other major forces could find out that the assassin who killed Ji Tianxing was from the Hidden Killer Pavilion, the Hidden Killer Pavilion was powerful. However, the Hidden Slayer Pavilion was very powerful. Their connections in the Chu Yun Empire were deeply rooted. Furthermore, the Hidden Killer Pavilion was very secretive and had many experts in charge. No one was willing to offend the Hidden Killer Pavilion. Even the imperial family would not start a war with the Hidden Killer Pavilion for Ji Tianxing. Anyway, Ji Tianxing was not dead and he would leave the Chu Yun Empire in 3 days. No one wanted to cause more trouble. Just like that, the matter was left unsettled. The Hidden Killer Pavilion did not send any more assassins and the mastermind did not make any further moves. Of course, the Hidden Killer Pavilion had offended the Sage Emperor by looking down on him. They would definitely be suppressed by the Sage Emperor in the future. The eyes of the various forces were focused on Yin Wu-Qiu. His mansion in the south of the city had become the focus of attention. Many forces were guessing that Yin Wu-Qiu must have a motive for being so close to Ji Tianxing. As for the imperial family, there were also rumors from the imperial palace. It was said that on the second morning of the incident, Yin Wu-Qiu personally went to the imperial palace to meet the Sage Emperor and had a long talk with him. No one knew what they talked about. Everyone only knew that in the next 3 days, Ji Tianxing stayed in Yin Wu-Qiu's mansion and did not show his face. The Sage Emperor did not express any opinions on this matter and seemed to have silently agreed. 3 days passed quickly. On this morning, when the sun rose from the east, countless citizens had gathered in the city square. There were at least 300,000 people gathered in the spacious square and were discussing with anticipation. Today was the day of the arrival of the Clear Sky Pagoda's messenger. The 15 young geniuses were also going to leave the Chu Yun Empire and head to the Clear Sky Pagoda. Almost all the citizens knew that the Clear Sky Pagoda was the holy land of martial arts and the place where the Divine Master taught. It had a revered and holy status. No one had seen the Clear Sky Pagoda with their own eyes and had never bathed in its divine light. However, everyone knew that every time the messenger of the Clear Sky Pagoda arrived in the imperial city, it would bring along a sky full of divine light. Under the envelopment of the divine light, flowers fell from the sky and green lotuses surged from the ground. There were even thousands of rays of multicolored light and thousands of strands of auspicious qi. Any martial artist who had been baptized by the divine light would have a cleansing effect. Their martial aptitude would be even more outstanding, and their comprehension talent would also increase accordingly. All in all, this was a miracle that only happened once every 20 years. It would bring great benefits to the people. Therefore, every time the divine envoys arrived at the imperial city, it would cause a huge commotion. As time passed, the morning sun gradually rose into the sky. More and more citizens rushed over from all directions and gathered around the square. The huge square was surrounded by people, and not even a drop of water could trickle through. As far as the eye could see, it was packed with people. The number of people present today was even more than the number on the day of the ranking battle, reaching almost 600,000. In the middle of the square, there were already over 100 people lined up in an orderly formation on the arena that was 1,000 feet above the ground. They were all standing respectfully. They were the civil and military officials of the Chu Yun Empire and the 15 young geniuses. Not long after, Great Emperor Chu Yun, the Holy Master, and the 8 nobles also stepped onto the stage and stood in front of everyone. The arena was silent. Everyone's faces were solemn, and their hearts were filled with anticipation. The 600,000 citizens in the square also remained silent. They looked up at the sky with excitement and waited in silence. When the sun was high in the sky, a dazzling golden light suddenly lit up in the southern sky. It was a belt of dazzling golden light. It was as fast as lightning, and it streaked across the sky toward Heavenly Cloud City. The hundreds of thousands of citizens in the square immediately burst into cheers of joy. Look, the divine envoys have arrived. We've waited for 20 years. We can finally see the divine envoys again. I've been shackled for more than 10 years. I hope that today, I can bathe in the divine light and successfully break through. The cheers rose and fell, and they converged into a torrential sound wave that reverberated through the sky. On the arena, Ji Tianxing, Wu Qiu, and the dozen young geniuses all turned their heads to look at the southern sky. Their eyes were filled with anticipation. Yin Wu Qiu stood beside Ji Tianxing. Seeing Ji Tianxing's calm expression, Yin Wu Qiu transmitted a message to remind him, Mr. Ji, when the godly light descends, you must focus on refining it. It will be extremely beneficial. Ji Tianxing only nodded slightly and didn't say anything. In the blink of an eye, the dazzling golden light flew into the imperial city and arrived above the square. Instantly, the sun in the sky was blocked out. Half of the imperial city was enveloped by the divine golden light. Heaven and earth were filled with dazzling light, and the air was filled with extremely dense heaven and earth spirit chi. Within the golden light and clouds, there was a sacred and solemn guard of honor. More than 100 guards in golden armor, each of them handsome and heroic. They held golden halberds in their hands and had treasured swords at their waists. They looked very dignified. There were also over 100 young and beautiful maids, dressed in exquisite dresses, holding all kinds of musical instruments, playing the beautiful sounds of nature. 100 guards and 100 maids clustered around a luxurious golden carriage. The golden carriage was more than 100 feet wide. It was gilded with gold and inlaid with tens of thousands of precious gems and divine jades. Its design was extremely exquisite and beautiful. Without a doubt, this was the carriage of the Clear Sky Pagoda's envoy. It was a symbol of his prestige and extraordinary status. The sage emperor looked up at the golden carriage in the sky and saluted first. He bowed and shouted, "Welcome to Heavenly Cloud City, divine envoy." As the sage emperor's voice fell, the sage emperor, the civil and military officials, as well as the hundreds of thousands of commoners, all knelt on the ground and kowtowed respectfully. "Welcome to Heavenly Cloud City, divine envoy." The uniform shouts converged into a deafening torrent of sound waves that resounded through the clouds. The sage emperor maintained a bowing posture. The civil and military officials, as well as the hundreds of thousands of commoners, also maintained a kowtowing posture. They were very sincere. The golden carriage high in the sky gradually lit up with dazzling rainbow-colored divine light. A tall and burly figure walked out of the golden carriage and stood on the golden auspicious cloud. This person wore a purple robe with dragons and phoenixes carved on it. The lapel of the robe was embroidered with the pattern of stars, sun, and moon. He looked very noble. He was a middle-aged man with a dignified face. He had a beard and a golden crown on his head. His temperament was dignified but elegant. He had the ethereal aura of an otherworldly expert. Obviously, he was the envoy sent by the Clear Sky Pagoda to receive them. He looked down at the entire square from above. His eyes swept over the civil and military officials, the 15 young geniuses, and the hundreds of thousands of commoners. His voice was loud and solemn as he said, "Clear sky is virtuous. It benefits the common people. It enlightens and nourishes all living things." He chanted some kind of sacred incantation. His hands slowly unfurled a dark golden scroll. Suddenly, a rainbow-colored divine light gushed out of the scroll. It poured down like a torrential flood and enveloped the entire square. The area completely turned into a world of golden light. Hundreds of thousands of people were bathed in the divine light. Their bodies were undergoing subtle and mysterious changes. Their strength and talents were also rapidly increasing. Chapter 1496. Under the cover of the vast heaven divine light, half of the city, with the plaza as its center, became a world of dreams. The sky and the ground were filled with dazzling and colorful scenes. Life flourished and spirit chi surged, transforming into a dense 7-colored spirit mist that swept out like a tide. The hundreds of thousands of people prostrated on the ground, intoxicated as they devoured the divine light. They enjoyed the refreshing feeling of bathing in the spring breeze. Their spirits and complexions became energetic and high-spirited. Their bodies underwent minute changes, and their talent and potential were also imperceptibly rising. Originally, there were many old and weak people in the crowd, as well as martial artists who were heavily injured. Under the baptism of the divine light, those white-haired and elderly people quickly regained their spirits, and their weak vitality became much stronger. The injured and sick people also rapidly recovered from their injuries, and their illnesses quickly disappeared. Everyone had benefited greatly, and their hearts were filled with respect and gratitude for the vast heaven divine Lord, and they supported him immensely. Even the civil and military officials on the stage, as well as the 10-some young geniuses, were silently growing stronger and more talented. Ji Tianxing, Yin Wook, Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the others all closed their eyes, silently circulating their energy to refine the energy of the divine light. Ji Tianxing's body was suffused with a golden light, and he was rapidly devouring the divine light. His talent and comprehension were also imperceptibly rising. To everyone's surprise, the heaven-mending pearl that had fused with his origin soul was also actively devouring the divine light. This way, the divine light and 7-colored spirit mist in a radius of several thousand feet all surged into his body like rivers flowing into the sea. He was like a bottomless pit, madly devouring the world's spirit chi and divine light. His speed was several dozen times faster than the other geniuses. The golden divine light and 7-colored spirit mist danced around him, forming a 7-colored vortex that was extremely dazzling. The surrounding geniuses and civil and military officials were all immersed in the baptism of the divine light. Suddenly, everyone sensed that the divine light and spirit chi had become thinner, and they opened their eyes in confusion. Then, they saw Ji Tianxing surrounded by a 7-colored vortex, which was madly devouring the divine light and spirit mist. Everyone was immediately dumbfounded, and they all revealed expressions of disbelief as they stared at him in shock. The 8 nobles, Saint Masters, and Saint Emperors were also alarmed. They all turned their heads to look at him with strange expressions. After a while, the young genius and the civil and military officials came to their senses and glared at him, their hearts filled with anger and dissatisfaction. Lan Yiqing and the other young geniuses, in particular, looked at him coldly with hatred and murderous intent. After all, he alone had devoured about 80% of the divine light and spiritual mist in the arena. The other geniuses and civil and military officials also wanted to use this rare opportunity to greatly improve their talent and strength. Now, 80% of the divine light and spiritual energy had been snatched away by Ji Tianxing. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd and the oracle watching from the sky, no one could stop Ji Tianxing, nor could they fly elsewhere to devour the divine light. Everyone could only suppress their anger, maintain a respectful attitude, and devour the remaining 20% of divine light and spiritual energy with all their strength. After a while, the purple-robed oracle on the golden auspicious cloud noticed the abnormality in the arena. He frowned as he looked at Ji Tianxing, who was in the crowd. When he saw the 7-colored vortex, a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. Ordinary people did not know that the clear sky divine light that the purple-robed oracle had released came from the mysterious scroll in his hand. It was a divine artifact, the clear sky diagram, which was made by the divine master Taihao himself. It was a divine artifact that was made to educate and nurture the people. When the purple-robed oracle activated the clear sky diagram and released the clear sky divine light, it would cover half of the city and benefit millions of people. It would also benefit the people equally. Other than the martial sages, no one could monopolize the spiritual chi and divine light. The martial sages were basically the saint emperors and saint masters of the various empires. They would not disregard their status and snatch the divine light. Therefore, Ji Tianxing's situation was extremely rare. The purple-robed oracle had controlled the clear sky diagram for more than 1,000 years. He had only encountered such a situation once, and it was 800 years ago. The person who could monopolize the divine light and spiritual chi was a peerless genius with the abyss body. He was born with the ability to devour all kinds of spiritual chi and spiritual chi. Now, the genius with the peerless treasure body had long become a martial saint whose name had shaken the world. That person sat in the clear sky pagoda and was the great guardian. Thinking of this, the purple-robed oracle's pupils constricted and a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. A peerless genius is going to appear in the small Chu Yun Empire? Although he was an expert who had cultivated for more than 1,000 years, his state of mind was as still as water and he did not show his emotions on his face. However, at this moment, his heartbeat sped up and his eyes shone brightly. He stared at Ji Tianxing as if he wanted to see through Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing was immersed in cultivation. His primordial spirit and spiritual qi were increasing rapidly, and he did not see the change in the oracle's expression. Unknowingly, 100 breaths had passed. The purple-robed oracle slowly put away the clear sky diagram of the 9 heavens. The divine golden light that covered the sky gradually faded and disappeared. Hundreds of thousands of citizens were still kneeling on the ground, immersed in the subtle changes in their bodies. On the stage, the sage emperor, sage master, and civil and military officials said in unison, "Thank you, Oracle, for your blessing. May the glory of the clear sky divine Lord be eternal." As they shouted, everyone bowed and kowtowed. The purple-robed oracle nodded with a dignified expression. Standing on the golden cloud, he raised his hands and said, "You may rise." Then, he looked at the Chu-Yun emperor and asked in a serious tone, "Sage emperor, where are the 15 young geniuses selected by your empire?" The Chu-Yun emperor turned slightly and pointed at Ji Tianxing, Yin Wook, and the others. The 15 young geniuses stood in a row and bowed to the purple-robed oracle. The purple-robed oracle's gaze swept across Lan Yiqing, Yin Wook, and the others before landing on Ji Tianxing. "Young man, what is your name?" Ji Tianxing replied in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Ji Tianxing." The purple-robed oracle raised his eyebrows and nodded. I'll remember you. If I'm not wrong, you should be the #1 genius of the Chu-Yun Empire, right?" Ji Tianxing did not say much and only nodded calmly. The purple-robed oracle revealed a benevolent smile and said, "As expected." Seeing this scene, the civil and military officials were all shocked. They felt that it was unbelievable. The esteemed oracle actually ignored the other geniuses and spoke to Ji Tianxing with a benevolent attitude. What did this mean? Even an idiot would know. The dozen young geniuses instantly clenched their fists and secretly looked at Ji Tianxing with envy and jealousy. Chapter 1497. It was a great honor to be noticed by the god's messenger in front of so many people. Moreover, the god's messenger had spoken to Ji Tianxing in a friendly manner. Everyone understood that this was the god emissary's appreciation for Ji Tianxing. The hundreds of thousands of citizens were shocked. The officials were envious. The sage emperor and the sage master looked at each other and smiled proudly. Only a few young geniuses had ugly expressions. Their hearts were filled with hatred and jealousy. Lan Yiqing's aura became colder. She stared at Ji Tianxing with a gaze as sharp as a knife. She thought to herself, "Damn it. Even the god's messenger favored him and thought highly of him. And all of this originally belonged to me, Ji Tianxing. One day, I will kill you with my own hands. I will trample all your glory and pride under my feet and trample on them wantonly." Wook Yin, who was standing beside Ji Tianxing, also looked at him with a complicated expression. His eyes were as bright as gems. This young master's eyes have never been wrong. From the first time I saw him, I knew that he was extraordinary. As expected, he is so dazzling no matter where he is. Not only does the sage emperor think highly of him, but even the god's messenger is impressed. It's a pity that he is too cold and arrogant. Otherwise, I would have tricked him back to the Flower Moon Palace. It was not only Lan Yiqing and Yin Wook. Everyone in the arena had their own thoughts. Not long after, the god's messenger and Emperor Chu-Yun finished talking. The god's messenger cupped his hands at Emperor Chu-Yun and said solemnly, "Sage Emperor, I am here to welcome the geniuses of your country. Time is of the essence, so I will not stay any longer." With that, he waved his sleeves and shot out a dazzling flame. It poured down from the sky and extended to the arena. The dark red flame immediately formed a staircase that connected the arena to the golden clouds. "Heroes, come on up." The god's messenger's voice came from the sky. Ji Tianxing took the lead and walked towards the fiery red staircase. He followed the staircase and walked towards the golden auspicious clouds in the sky. Lan Yiqing, Yin Wook, and the rest followed closely behind him and stepped onto the staircase. After a while, everyone stepped onto the golden clouds and entered the golden chariot. The golden chariot looked very luxurious. The interior was also very spacious. It could fit at least dozens of people. Ji Tianxing, Lan Yiqing, and the rest gathered in a room that looked like a big hall. They sat in 2 rows on both sides of the hall. Other than the 15 of them, there were only the god's messenger, a few maids, and guards in the golden chariot. Not long after, hundreds of maids began to play music, and the guard of honor set out on their journey. The golden clouds, the golden chariot and the guards, they flew across the sky. In a short span of 10 breaths, the golden cloud disappeared into the horizon. On the square, the civil and military officials, as well as the hundreds of thousands of people, were still immersed in joy and excitement, whispering to each other. Inside the golden chariot, in the grand hall, Ji Tianxing and the other prodigies sat on the golden floor. Some cultivated silently, while others rested with their eyes closed. Everyone knew that the journey from Heavenly Cloud City to the Clear Sky Pagoda was very long. During this time, no one was allowed to move around. They could only stay in the hall. The god's messenger didn't show himself either. He stayed in his personal room. No one knew what he was doing. Ji Tianxing closed his eyes and thought to himself, "I've finally left the Chu Yun Empire. Emperor Chu Yun, the hidden killer pavilion, and the Lan family won't be able to do anything to me. After all, no one dares to attack the god's messenger's guard. Once I reach the Clear Sky Pagoda, I have to find Yarrow Yarrow as soon as possible." He remembered that Yun Yarrow had only fused with 2 Neptunian divine pearls. She only had a few years left. He had to find Yun Yarrow as soon as possible and help Yun Yarrow find more Neptunian divine pearls. Only then could he extend her life. At that moment, a voice transmission rang out in his head. "Young Master Ji, it looks like the enmity between you and Lan Yiqing can't be resolved. She clearly hates you to the core. She won't stop until you die. Especially after the god's messenger asked for your name." Lan Yiqing almost exploded in anger. She kept staring at you as if she wanted to eat you alive. The person who transmitted the voice was Flawless Yin, who was sitting beside him. Ji Tianxing opened his eyes instinctively and met Lan Yiqing's cold and sharp eyes. Lan Yiqing was sitting across from him, only 10 steps away. Her cold eyes were as sharp as swords and filled with hatred. Ji Tianxing glanced at her expressionlessly and indifferently, then closed his eyes and continued to rest. In Lan Yiqing's eyes, his reaction showed that he was looking down on her and didn't care about her at all. Her face grew colder and colder. Her entire body radiated with cold air, turning the entire hall into an icy cavern. Unparalleled shame and anger almost exploded out of him. However, she quickly regained her senses. She tried her best to suppress the killing intent in her heart and slowly retracted her extreme cold air. This slight change couldn't escape the senses of the young geniuses. Everyone secretly observed Lan Yiqing and Ji Tianxing. They all laughed coldly in their hearts and took pleasure in their misfortune. Flawless Yin transmitted his voice again. "Although you've left the Chu Yun Empire and are about to go to the Clear Sky Pagoda, you don't have to worry about the hidden killer pavilion and the Lan family's assassination attempts. However, Lan Yiqing will definitely do everything in her power to kill you." Ji Tianxing was still as calm as ever as he transmitted his voice to him. "So what? She's just a loser. I don't care about her anymore. If she dares to try to assassinate me again, I will definitely take her life." Again. Flawless Yin was startled. He explained in a low voice, "Young Master Ji, to be honest, the Lan family must have ordered the assassins from the hidden killer pavilion to assassinate you. I think this has nothing to do with Lan Yiqing. She has a proud personality and doesn't care about such things. Even if she wanted to kill you, she would do it herself. She wouldn't use the hands of assassins." Ji Tianxing was silent for a while. Then, he asked, "Isn't the result the same? If I die, she will have achieved her goal." "No, you don't understand." Flawless Yin explained again, "Lan Yiqing is a very stubborn person. She is also a crazy person who can't be reasoned with. If not for that, she wouldn't have been able to endure 20 years of cruel cultivation and torture to reach her current strength. You have to understand that if a woman is ruthless, there is nothing a man can do." Ji Tianxing thought that since he had nothing to do, he started to chat with him. "You seem to know Lan Yiqing very well." "Of course," Flawless Yin said without hesitation. "She was born in the Eternal Night Glacier. She is the apple of the Eternal Night Martial Monarch's eye. She is the most outstanding descendant of the Lan family. I am the young master of the Flower Moon Palace. The Flower Moon Palace and the Eternal Night Glacier have been enemies for a long time. I am also Lan Yiqing's enemy. For the past 10 years, my goal has been to surpass her and become the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire. Chapter 1498. Ji Tianxing was puzzled and asked subconsciously, "Why should I give up?" Yin Wuqiu's tone was playful and helpless. He smiled and said, "Lan Yiqing has already become the #2 genius, and you, the #1 genius, are too monstrous." Obviously, he knew that his talent was not as good as Ji Tianxing's and that he had no hope of becoming the #1 genius, so he gave up. Ji Tianxing said calmly, "You are smart." Yin Wuqiu rolled his eyes at him. "You are really annoying sometimes. Humility is a virtue, why can't you be more gentle and elegant? You will definitely have more friends." Ji Tianxing did not reply and changed the topic. "What is your goal now?" Yin Wuqiu replied without hesitation, "To become friends with you and help you change your arrogance, coldness, and other flaws." "Sorry, I don't know you." Ji Tianxing replied calmly. Yin Wuqiu was so angry that he rolled his eyes. His eyebrows twitched and his thin lips trembled. You are really annoying, I shouldn't have cared about you." Ji Tianxing was silent for a while before he said calmly, "If you were more masculine and less feminine, maybe we could be friends." Yin Wuqiu's anger dissipated and he said, Flower Moon Palace is the #1 female sect in the country. There are 800 servants and 49 disciples, all of them are women. I grew up in Flower Moon Palace and have always been dressed like this. How can you blame me?" Ji Tianxing was stunned for a while before he said sincerely, "I see, then you are really pitiful." Yin Wuqiu was not angry. Instead, he smiled and said, "Why should I be pitiful? Aren't you envious? Don't all men like to be surrounded by flowers?" The maids and disciples of the Flower Moon Palace were all 1 in a million beauties, each with their own unique characteristics. Graceful, gentle, virtuous, lively. There are even bold and unrestrained ones, there are all kind. If there is a chance in the future, I will bring you back to Flower Moon Palace and you can choose from thousands of beauties. Are you tempted? Have I treated you well enough?" Ji Tianxing didn't answer. He just looked at him calmly. Yin Wuqiu looked straight into his eyes. He could only see that his eyes were clear and deep. His gaze was cold, without a trace of desire. Even if Ji Tianxing did not say a word, he understood Ji Tianxing's attitude. He suddenly felt a little embarrassed and guilty. He hurriedly explained, cough cough. "Young Master Ji, please don't take offense. I was just joking." Only then did Ji Tianxing withdraw his gaze and continue to close his eyes to rest as he sent a voice transmission to ask, "Tell me about the vast heaven pagoda." Wu Qiu was also happy to change the topic, and hurriedly explained, "I have always set becoming a god disciple as my goal, so I have some understanding of the Clear Sky Pagoda." The Clear Sky Pagoda was the place where God Lord Taihao imparted the Tao, as well as the sacred land of martial arts for the 6 great empires. It was located at the border between the Azure Dragon Empire and the White Knight Empire, atop the sacred Mount God Bestowment. Every 20 years, the various great empires would select 10 to 20 young geniuses and send them to the vast heaven pagoda to undergo guidance and training. The hundreds of young geniuses would have half a year of training and preparation time. After half a year, the vast heaven pagoda would conduct an assessment. The geniuses who successfully passed the assessment would become honorary god disciples. Every honorary god disciple is equivalent to a disciple of the Divine Lord Taihao. They have the qualifications to learn the Divine Lord's techniques, insights, array diagrams and so on. The status of a god disciple is extremely revered, and their future achievements are limitless. They have a high chance of becoming a martial saint, or at the very least, a 5 tribulation martial lord. As for the geniuses who are eliminated, they can only be sent to the divine nations in the 9 heavens and become their servants. Ji Tianxing silently listened to Yin Wuqiu's words. He thought to himself, half a year of preparation is actually not that significant to the young geniuses at the primordial spirit realm. Even if they could cultivate in the vast heaven pagoda, it would be very difficult for them to increase their cultivation by 1 level in half a year. I reckon that only the top geniuses of the various empires can become God disciples. As for the title of 5 Tribulation Martial Lord, he understood after thinking for a bit. On the Shunwu continent, primordial spirit realm warriors were called powerhouses. Powerhouses who had reached the tribulation stage were called martial lords. Those who had undergone 2 heavenly tribulations were called 2 tribulation martial lords. Those who had undergone 5 heavenly tribulations were called 5 tribulation martial lords. As for martial saints above the tribulation stage, they were often called great emperors. They were very few in number, and were usually emperors or sagemasters who controlled empires. Even though Yin Wu Qiu's eyes shone brightly when he talked about the God disciples, he seemed very excited and expectant. However, Ji Tianxing was not interested in divine servants or God disciples. He only thought about how to find Yun Yaro after entering the vast heaven pagoda. Next, he chatted with Yin Wu Qiu for a while and asked him about the vast heaven pagoda. It was a pity that Yin Wu Qiu did not know much. After a few hours, the two of them calmed down and silently cultivated. Unknowingly, a month had passed. The golden cloud carried the guard of honor and the golden carriage, crossing half of the Outcloud Empire and half of the Blue Dragon Empire before finally arriving at Mount God Bestowment. This was the border between the Blue Dragon Empire and the Day-Night Empire. Within a radius of a few million miles, there were endless mountain ranges. It was afternoon, and the sky was blue. The sun was bright but not scorching hot. A gentle breeze blew through the sky, and the ground was covered with undulating mountain ranges. There were many majestic mountain peaks. Almost every mountain peak was more than 10,000 feet tall, and its peak was covered by clouds. It was hazy and indistinct. The mountain peaks were covered with dark green primitive forests, which released extremely dense green wood spiritual energy and vitality. At the foot of the mountains, there were a few large rivers that looked like jade belts. They meandered and flowed, and the surface of the rivers sparkled with golden light. In front of the golden cloud, about a few hundred miles away, there was an enormous black mountain that was 40,000 feet tall. It was the most majestic and precipitous mountain within a radius of a few million miles. It occupied a radius of 1,000 miles, and it was like a pillar that supported the heavens and the earth. This mountain peak was where the vast heaven pagoda was located, the legendary Mount God Bestowment. The Mount God Bestowment was extremely steep, and its surroundings were almost perfectly straight, as if it had been cut by the sword of a deity. On the entire mountain, there was almost no dark green forest or vegetation. Ancient brown rocks were exposed, and they were covered with traces of the vicissitudes of life. Halfway up the mountain, they were covered by a vast expanse of white clouds. The peak of the 40,000 feet tall Mount God Bestowment was a flat land with a radius of 100 miles. It was like a place where deities preached, and also like an altar used to cast spells. The area of this place was comparable to a majestic city, and it could accommodate millions of people. However, there was no majestic city at the peak of the mountain. There were only dozens of magnificent palaces, and they were clustered around a golden divine pagoda that reached the cloud. Chapter 1499. The sacred and majestic vast heaven pagoda seemed to connect heaven and earth. The heaven and earth spiritual energy within a radius of several million miles all converged over invisibly, pouring into the vast heaven pagoda. The Bodhidharma was surrounded by a vast white sea of clouds, while the surroundings of the vast heaven pagoda were thick 7-colored spirit fog. Still separated by 100 miles, Ji Tianxing and the rest could see that there were flocks of snow-white immortal cranes flying in the sky above the Bodhidharma. There was even a series of low beast roars and dragon roars that came over. Ji Tianxing could determine based on the sounds that there were definitely many spirit beasts, even divine beasts, reared inside the Bodhidharma. Before long, the golden auspicious cloud flew above the Bodhidharma and landed on a spacious plaza. The plaza with a radius of 10,000 feet, the ground was paved with grayish-white boulders, engraved with many mysterious and profound patterns. This kind of boulder material was incomparably hard. Furthermore, it had the effects of gathering spirit, setting up formations, and so on. The north, south, east, west, 4 directions of the plaza towered 4 enormous black stone tablets. On them were rows of large golden characters that lit up, writing all sorts of information. 6 dark golden palaces towered around the plaza. Each palace had 3 floors, reaching several tens of meters tall, the aura majestic and dignified. The golden auspicious cloud dispersed. The purple-robed divine envoy and the 15 young geniuses walked out of the golden carriage in succession. The maidservants and guards clustered around the golden carriage, swiftly leaving the plaza. There were only 16 people left in the plaza. The 15 young geniuses stood in a row, silently sizing up the surrounding scene. The purple-robed divine envoy stood in front of everyone and said with a dignified expression, "Everyone, welcome to Lord Divine Master's Bodhidharma, the vast heaven pagoda. Let me introduce myself. This envoy is surnamed Lin, named Dowie. I'm one of the vast heaven pagoda's 6 great divine envoys, in charge of liaising with the Outcloud Empire's matters. In the future, when everyone cultivates here, you can consult this envoy if you have any questions." Ji Tianxing and the dozen over young geniuses cupped their hands and bowed to Lin Dowie one after another. Lin Dowie pointed to the 6 palaces around the plaza and introduced, "These 6 palaces are respectively named Outcloud Palace, White Knight Palace, Azure Dragon Palace. The 6 palaces correspond to the 6 great empires. That Outcloud Palace will be your residence for the next half a year. During this 6 months, you will receive the best treatment, the most abundant resources, and the guidance and teaching of the oracle. You must seize the time and opportunity to improve your strength as much as possible, because half a year later, your fates will change. The strong would obtain glory and walk towards an even more glorious peak. The weak will be eliminated and become slaves of the god nation. They will lose their freedom and status and accept an unknown fate." The expressions of the young geniuses changed slightly when they heard this. Some people's eyes were solemn, and worry flashed in their eyes. Some people had firm gazes, as if they had made up their minds. There were also a few people whose eyes were shining with excitement and anticipation. Lin Dowie calmly swept his gaze across the crowd and said in a dignified tone, "That's all I have to say. Everyone, do your best. Now, all of you can go to Chuyun Palace to rest. I will inform you if there is anything else." With that, Lin Dowie turned around and left. Everyone watched as he left the square. Only then did they look away and walk toward Chuyun Palace. The magnificent Chuyun Palace was guarded by guards outside the gate, and there were many maids inside the palace. The entire palace could be said to be magnificent. There were carved beams and painted rafters everywhere, and it was built with gold and jade. Everyone stayed on the first floor of the palace. Everyone had their own room. There was a bedroom, a living room, a study, and a secret room. They even had 2 maids. After Ji Tianxing entered his room, he asked the 2 maids to leave. He meditated and cultivated alone in the secret room. Ever since he left the Chuyun Empire, he had been cultivating the sword Soul Dao and comprehending the 6th move of the 9 swords of the burial of heaven. To become an expert that could look down on others, it was not enough to rely on outstanding talent and aptitude. One had to cultivate harder than others. Wu Qiu, Lan Yiqing, and the rest were the most outstanding young geniuses in the Chuyun Empire. They were also experts in the primordial soul realm. Everyone was like Ji Tianxing. After entering their rooms, they focused on cultivating. They did not want to waste any time. In the evening, in the palace of the Chuyun Empire, the simple and elegant imperial study was silent and peaceful. The afterglow of the setting sun shone through the window into the study and happened to shine on Emperor Chuyun. He leaned against the luxurious throne and closed his eyes to rest. At this moment, the door of the study opened. Following a series of light footsteps, a white-robed sage master walked into the study with a golden book and a black brush. He came before Emperor Chuyun and bowed. Reporting to the sage emperor, "I'm here to report." Emperor Chuyun opened his eyes and asked unhurriedly, "Have you done what I asked you to do?" The sage master nodded and said in a serious tone, "I've already made the arrangements. In 3 days at most, the news will spread to the various countries. The royal families and top forces will know about it." Emperor Chuyun nodded slightly and revealed a satisfied smile. "That's good. Let's wait and see." The sage master hesitated for a moment before saying, "Sage Emperor, I still have something that I don't understand. Please enlighten me." Emperor Chuyun raised an eyebrow and said in a dignified tone, "Speak." The Sage Master's tone was solemn as he said, "A month ago, when Ji Tianxing used that mysterious black sword on the arena, you already noticed some clues. Later, you personally went out of the palace to see him. After seeing that sword, you were able to confirm that it was the legendary sword of the Burial of Heaven. The Burial of Heaven was Kenshin's personal sword, and it was the #1 divine sword in the entire Shunwu continent. Ever since Kenshin had fallen, the Burial of Heaven had mysteriously disappeared. Countless powerhouses and organizations had searched for it for thousands of years, but to no avail. For a long time, there had been a legend circulating throughout the Shunwu continent. Whoever obtained the Burial of Heaven would be able to find Kenshin's tomb. That divine sword was the key to opening Kenshin's tomb. Kenshin's tomb not only contained Kenshin's relics, but also Kenshin's lifetime of absolute arts and divine inheritance. If one could inherit Kenshin's absolute arts and divine path, they could become the second Kenshin. When he mentioned the legend of Kenshin and the Burial of Heaven, the Sage Master's expression became solemn. His tone was filled with excitement and reverence, and his deep eyes flickered with a bright light. It was obvious that he revered Kenshin and the Burial of Heaven greatly. 1,000 years have passed, and the Burial of Heaven has finally reappeared in this world, but it has fallen into the hands of a nameless brat. What a waste of such a treasure! Sage Emperor, why didn't you kill Ji Tianxing and take away his Burial of Heaven? Instead, you allowed him to obtain first place and smoothly enter the Clear Sky Pagoda. Although he made up a story and hinted that he was related to the Clear Sky Pagoda, those words could not deceive us. He was just a commoner with no background. If you wanted to kill him, it would be as easy as flipping your hand, and there wouldn't be any trouble. The #1 divine sword that had shaken the entire continent had actually fallen into the hands of a nameless brat, which made the Sage Master very angry. Chapter 1500. The Sage Master's status was transcendent, and he always had a sage-like demeanor. At this moment, he was truly enraged, and his emotions were quite agitated. One could imagine how much of a psychological impact the news of the Burial of Heaven and the secrets of Kenshin's tomb had on him. Emperor Chuyun waved his hand at him, indicating for him to calm down. Then, the emperor revealed a meaningful sneer and slowly explained, "That's right. It's precisely because Ji Tianxing possesses the Burial of Heaven that I indulged his arrogance and personally went to see him. I even allowed him to head to the Clear Sky Pagoda. The Burial of Heaven is not only a peerless divine weapon, but also the key to Kenshin's tomb. It's truly the world's #1 divine weapon. I'm not the only one who wants it, all the emperors of the various empires and the top powers of each country covet it. Even the 3 divine masters want to obtain the Burial of Heaven and uncover the secrets of Kenshin's tomb. After all, Kenshin is the #1 genius since ancient times, and his martial arts talent is unprecedented. All the powerhouses in the world, including the 3 divine masters, worship and respect him greatly. Most importantly, Kenshin is the only one who has ascended in the past 30,000 years. He's the only one who has the method to ascend." After hearing Emperor Chuyun's words, the Sage Master nodded in agreement and said with some excitement, "That's right. Ever since the end of the Great War of the Gods, this world has been sealed by the gods. The continents are not connected to each other, and even martial gods are unable to ascend. The world is shrouded in invisible shackles. Only Kenshin from 1,000 years ago managed to break through the shackles and ascend to the higher realms. He then became the God King who ruled the heavens. He's the pride of our Shunwu continent, and is also the person who brought hope to the entire continent. If we obtain the Burial of Heaven, we can find Kenshin's tomb and obtain Kenshin's inheritance, as well as the method to ascend to the higher realms. Saint Emperor, you know better than this old man how important the sword of Burial of Heaven is. Why did you let Ji Tianxing leave with the divine sword?" The smile on Great Emperor Chuyun's face became more and more playful as he said in a low voice, "That's right. I've always dreamed of obtaining the sword of Burial of Heaven, but now was definitely not the time." The ranking battle of the god disciples that day had caused a sensation in the entire imperial city. Ji Tianxing had become famous after the battle and was now being targeted by various superpowers. It's easy for me to kill him and seize the sword of Burial of Heaven, But who can guarantee that the news won't leak out? If someone were to recognize the Sword of Burial of Heaven, wouldn't everyone know that the Sword of Burial of Heaven was in his possession? Moreover, once I obtain the Sword of Burial of Heaven and open Kenshin's tomb, there will definitely be a heavenly anomaly. At that time, the 6 great empires would be in an uproar, and this matter would spread throughout the world. The empires and countless experts would crazily fight for the Sword of Burial of Heaven and find Kenshin's tomb at all cost. The Chu-Yun Empire and I would be in an extremely dangerous situation. Hearing this, the sage sovereign had already guessed his thoughts. He nodded silently and said, "That's right. The Sword of Burial of Heaven contains Kenshin's inheritance and the secret of ascension. It's enough to make everyone go crazy." Great Emperor Chu-Yun's expression became more and more solemn as he said in a low voice, "For hundreds of years, the 6 great empires have been fighting both openly and secretly, trying to annex and eliminate each other. Our Chu-Yun Empire's strength is only ranked 5th among the 6 great empires. Our foundation is very weak. Once the other 5 great empires know that the Sword of Burial of Heaven is in my possession, they will definitely do everything they can to fight for it and seize it. At that time, how can we resist the 5 great empires who are like wolves and tigers? I'm afraid that we won't be able to protect the Sword of Burial of Heaven at all. Even the entire Chu-Yun Empire will be destroyed in the flames of war. Therefore, we must not be hasty." The sage sovereign finally understood and nodded. "I see. The sage sovereign is indeed far-sighted. This old man understands now. Although the Sword of Burial of Heaven is a peerless divine weapon and contains enormous secrets, it's also a hot potato, a fatal poisonous blade. No matter who obtains the Sword of Burial of Heaven, they will become the target of public criticism and be besieged by various countries' powerhouses and various major forces. The sage sovereign allowing Ji Tianxing to go to the vast Heaven Pagoda is to divert the disaster away, so as to not implicate our Chu-Yun Empire. You also made this old man release the news of the Sword of Burial of Heaven, wanting the 5 great empires to make a move to snatch it one after another and fight each other for the Sword of Burial of Heaven. At that time, you can reap the benefits and truly obtain the Sword of Burial of Heaven." Only after the sage sovereign finished speaking did Great Emperor Chu-Yun nod his head slightly, revealing a hint of a sinister sneer. "That's right. A wise person must plan well before taking action, and also have to be far-sighted and predict the future." A month has passed. Presently, Ji Tianxing should have arrived at the vast Heaven Pagoda. The news of the Sword of Burial of Heaven has also been released. This emperor believes that after the 5 great empires receive the news, they will quickly rush to the vast Heaven Pagoda and try to snatch the Sword of Burial of Heaven. However, no matter who obtains the Sword of Burial of Heaven in the end, they will be besieged from all sides, and even bring about the destruction of their country. We only need to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. As he spoke, Great Emperor Chu-Yun's eyes flickered with a cold light, and he sneered sinisterly. When the 5 great empires are fighting each other to the death in order to snatch the Sword of Burial of Heaven, it will be the best time for this emperor to make a move. At that time, not only will this emperor obtain the Sword of Burial of Heaven, but I will also unify the 6 great empires and become the #1 great emperor under the Divine Master. The sage sovereign is wise. With such a grand strategy, you will definitely achieve your wish." The sage sovereign hurriedly bowed and flattered sincerely. However, after he finished speaking, he frowned and thought for a while. He still asked worriedly, "Sage Sovereign, could that brat Ji Tianxing have already found Kenshin's tomb? If he didn't obtain Kenshin's inheritance, how could he be so monstrous?" Great Emperor Chu-Yun shook his head and said confidently, "Kenshin is the #1 god since ancient times. How could his tomb be found by an ordinary person? With that brat Ji Tianxing's strength and knowledge, it's impossible for him to find Kenshin's tomb. Moreover, he actually took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven in front of hundreds of thousands of people in the arena. This means that he doesn't know the secret of the Sword of Burial of Heaven and Kenshin's tomb. This damned fool doesn't understand what the Sword of Burial of Heaven means at all. Such an ignorant person actually obtained the Sword of Burial of Heaven. The heavens are truly blind." The sage sovereign was also filled with indignation. He nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. How glorious was Kenshin when he was alive? Not only was he worshipped by hundreds of millions of martial artists, but he also suppressed 3 martial gods with 1 sword. He was truly unparalleled and heroic. I didn't expect that today, 1,000 years later, Kenshin's sword would actually fall into the hands of a foolish brat. It's truly a pity that a bright pearl is covered in dust. The corner of Great Emperor Chu Yun's mouth twitched, and he revealed a confident and domineering sneer. He said in a low and forceful voice, "The sword of burial of heaven will belong to me one day. The territories and people of the other 5 empires will also submit to me." The sage sovereign looked at him with a determined gaze and said solemnly, "I will do my best to assist the sage sovereign and unify the 6 empires." Chapter 1501. The peak of Mount God Bestowment was as peaceful as ever. The clear sky pagoda gathered the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from millions of miles away, making the peak as beautiful as a fairyland. In a short 5 days, the young geniuses from the various empires arrived one after another under the guidance of the divine envoys and stayed in the various palaces. The dozen or so young geniuses from the Chu Yun Empire had been cultivating in the Chu Yun Palace and rarely showed themselves. During this period, Lin Daoyi also did not come to the Chu Yun Palace. Ji Tianxing cultivated in the secret chamber for 5 days and his strength improved imperceptibly. Unfortunately, he still could not fully comprehend the 6th sword imparted by the burial of heaven. The 9 swords of the burial of heaven were incomparably mysterious. Only those who had reached the deity realm could fully grasp it and unleash its greatest power. With Ji Tianxing's strength, it was already not easy for him to master the first 5 swords. As for the 6th sword, he would probably have to wait until he reached the peak of the primordial spirit realm before he could comprehend and grasp it. Early in the morning, Ji Tianxing was meditating in the secret chamber. Suddenly, a maid's clear voice sounded from outside the secret chamber. She reported, "Young Master Ji, Divine Envoy Lin Daoyi has come to visit. Please come quickly to meet him." Ji Tianxing, who was in the middle of cultivation, was immediately awakened by the maid's voice. He quickly ended his cultivation and opened his eyes. He muttered to himself, "Lin Daoyi actually came to find me alone. I came to the Clear Sky Pagoda as the number 1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire. Logically speaking, I should receive the best treatment and resources. Could it be that he came for this matter?" Ji Tianxing silently analyzed and felt that it was very possible. After all, he had been in the Clear Sky Pagoda for several days but had not received any resources or rewards. He got up and walked out of the secret chamber with a trace of anticipation. A maid was guarding the door of the secret chamber. When she saw him come out, she hurriedly bowed. "Young Master Ji, please follow this servant." Then, the maid led him through the corridor and the living room, and into the elegant study. When they reached the door of the study, the maid stopped and stood guard outside. Ji Tianxing stepped into the study and saw Lin Daoyi standing by the window, silently looking at the clouds outside. Ji Tianxing greets Divine Envoy Lin. Ji Tianxing cupped his hands and greeted Lin Daoyi. He then asked, "I wonder why Divine Envoy Lin has come to find me." Hearing this, Lin Daoyi turned around and looked at him with bright eyes, revealing a kind smile. "Ji Tianxing, I naturally have something important to discuss with you. Follow me to a place. Someone wants to see you." Ji Tianxing frowned and asked in confusion, "May I ask who wants to see me?" Lin Daoyi smiled and shook his head. "You don't have to ask. Follow me and you will know." Seeing how mysterious he was, Ji Tianxing was even more puzzled. But he didn't ask any more questions. He followed Lin Daoyi out of the study and left Chu Yun Palace. The 2 of them passed through the plaza outside the palace and walked towards the Clear Sky Pagoda in the distance. After a while, the 2 of them walked to the bottom of the Clear Sky Pagoda and stopped outside a dignified and sacred palace. This palace was very exquisite and beautiful. It was more imposing and dignified than the other palaces. It was also the palace closest to the Clear Sky Pagoda. Outside the wide gate, which was 10 feet tall, there were 99 white jade steps. There were 200 guards wearing golden armor standing guard. 2 huge statues stood on both sides of the gate. One was a divine dragon, and the other was a Chileen. Ji Tianxing could vaguely guess that the people who lived in this palace were either divine envoys of the Clear Sky Pagoda or protectors with a higher status than divine envoys. Lin Daoyi brought him to the palace gate and stopped. He smiled and said, "Ji Tianxing, I can only bring you here. You can go in by yourself." Ji Tianxing nodded his head at him and was about to stride into the great hall. Lin Daoyi hesitated for a bit, then transmitted his voice and exhorted, "You have to remember, be more respectful to that little lord. You absolutely can't offend her." Ji Tianxing's footsteps paused for a bit, feeling increasingly puzzled in his heart. But he did not ask any more. He lifted his foot and stepped into the great hall. It was only to see that inside the spacious great hall with a radius of 1,000 feet, it was a scene of splendor and splendor. The ground was paved with enormous golden bricks. There were a total of 18 pillars on both sides of the great hall. They were all vermilion with gold and carved with dragons and phoenixes. On the walls around the great hall, there were all kinds of mountains and rivers, scenes of the sun, moon, and stars, as well as some mysterious and ancient relief sculptures. The dome was inlaid with hundreds of millions of gemstones, akin to a vast sea of stars, emitting a bright brilliance, illuminating the entire great hall down to the finest detail. Ji Tianxing crossed the great hall and walked towards the north. There was a 90-foot-tall platform there, on which was a spacious throne. On the left and right sides of the throne, there were 2 valiant female guards in silver armor, each holding a dark golden halberd in their hands, looking majestic and awe-inspiring. And that spacious and luxurious gilded throne was like a crescent moon. The design was very exquisite and gorgeous, exuding a sacred and noble aura. When Ji Tianxing saw this throne clearly, he felt that it was somewhat familiar, and a strange look flashed across his eyes. "This throne, seems like I've seen it somewhere before." This thought popped up in his mind, and he fixed his eyes on the throne. He saw that on the spacious and luxurious throne, there was a petite and adorable figure lying on it. That's right. She was lying on her stomach, not sitting down. That was a petite little girl who was about 1 meter tall. She wore a fiery red long dress, had a head full of light golden hair, and wore exquisite and adorable headdresses. Her mouth and nose were petite and adorable, but her eyes were large and clear. Her delicate little face was filled with excitement and anticipation, as red as an apple. At this very moment, she was lying on the throne, staring fixedly at a black name list, looking exceptionally focused. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing instantly raised his eyebrows and revealed a gentle smile. "Juju, I didn't expect that. It's actually you." Without a doubt, that petite and adorable blonde little girl was the Juju whom he had met once before. Juju, who was concentrating on reading, was instantly startled awake by his voice. She hurriedly raised her head and turned her head to look at Ji Tianxing. When she saw Ji Tianxing's appearance clearly, she rolled and climbed up. Her little face revealed an extremely brilliant smile, and said with a heart full of surprise, "Tianxing, it's really you. When I saw your name just now, I was still thinking whether or not it could be a coincidence. I didn't expect that you really came. Hehe, you really didn't disappoint me. Not only did you participate in the God-Disciple selection, you even came to the Clear Sky Pagoda as the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire. This is really too unbelievable." Hearing what she said, Ji Tianxing understood that the black booklet that she was flipping through was most likely the name list of the God-Disciple selection candidates. His gaze fell on the black booklet, and a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. Chapter 1502. Juju was filled with excitement. Her face was flushed red as she stared at Ji Tianxing with sparkling eyes. Others might not know, but she knew very well that Ji Tianxing was not from Shunwu continent. Moreover, 10 months ago, Ji Tianxing had not reached the primordial spirit realm. Now, he had reached the 5th level of the primordial spirit realm. Even with Juju's status and knowledge, she could not understand such a miracle. She was extremely shocked. At this moment, Ji Tianxing deliberated for a moment. He looked at Juju with a solemn expression and said calmly, "Juju, I believe you know that you are my only friend here." Juju nodded hurriedly and said with a smile, Yes, of course." Ji Tianxing continued, "I came to the vast divine kingdom to participate in the God-Disciple selection, not to become a God-Disciple." Ah! Juju was stunned. The smile on her face disappeared. She frowned in confusion. She stared at Ji Tianxing with her big clear eyes and asked, "Tianxing, why did you participate in the god-disciple selection?" Ji Tianxing did not evade and said directly, "I came to the Clear Sky Pagoda to find someone who is more important to me than my life." Juju blinked her big round eyes and vaguely understood something. Ji Tianxing looked at her sincerely and asked, "Juju, can you help me check if there is a woman called Yun Yarrow here?" Juju revealed an as-expected expression and asked with a smile, "Tianxing, is the person you are looking for your lover?" "She is not my lover." Ji Tianxing shook his head and said solemnly, "She is my wife." "Oh." Juju dragged her voice. She had an as-expected expression. She hurriedly held the black name list and flipped through it quickly. Ji Tianxing stared at her with burning eyes. His heart was filled with anticipation and a trace of nervousness. If Yun Yarrow was in the vast Heaven Pagoda, that would be great news. If Yun Yarrow was not here, then all his previous efforts would be in vain, and the only glimmer of hope would be extinguished. How could he not be nervous in this situation? 100 breaths later, Juju finished flipping through the name list. She raised her head to look at Ji Tianxing and shook her head regretfully. "Tianxing, this is the list of the 6 nations' geniuses, but there is no one called Yun Yarrow on it." This news was like a bolt from the blue to Ji Tianxing. His body shook and his face stiffened. His burning eyes quickly dimmed and were filled with disappointment. Fortunately, he was mentally prepared, so he was able to withstand this blow. He pursed his lips in silence and did not lose his composure. Juju looked at him with concern. She could empathize with his disappointment and sadness. She thought for a moment and quickly consoled him, "Tianxing, don't be disheartened. This is only the list of the 6 nations' geniuses. Other than these 100 young geniuses, there are also many maids in the vast Heaven Pagoda. Let me help you check." Ji Tianxing was silent for a moment before shaking his head. "Juju, thank you, but there's no need. She came to the Shunwu continent 2 months earlier than me and is also a martial arts genius with outstanding talent. She definitely won't become a maid." Juju understood and nodded. "Since you are sure that Yun Yarrow will become a god disciple of some divine nation, then she is definitely not in the vast Heaven Pagoda. In fact, she is most likely not in the vast Heaven Pagoda." Ji Tianxing suppressed the disappointment in his heart and pulled himself together. His expression returned to normal as he said with a firm tone, "No matter where she is, I will definitely find her. Juju, I'm sorry. I'm afraid that we will have to say goodbye as soon as we meet. Yun Yarrow is not in the vast Heaven Pagoda, so there is no need for me to stay here and waste time." Juju was shocked and asked with a frown, "Tianxing, are you in a hurry to find her now?" Ji Tianxing did not speak, but he nodded with a firm expression. Juju quickly waved her small hand and persuaded, "Tianxing, I'm afraid that won't do. Don't be impatient and listen to my explanation. Yun Yarrow is not here, so she is most likely in the Heaven End Divine Nation or the Luoshui Divine Nation. The god-disciple selection in those 2 divine nations has already ended. Even if you leave the vast Heaven Pagoda now, you will definitely not be able to make it in time. Moreover, the 3 divine nations are extremely vast. If you search aimlessly, how long will it take?" Hearing this, Ji Tianxing fell silent. He frowned and said nothing. Juju continued, "Tianxing, it's not that I look down on you, but the continent is too vast and dangerous. With your current strength, it's impossible for you to cross the Shunwu continent, let alone enter the sacred grounds of those 2 divine nations. In addition, every divine nation has its corresponding divine laws, and the vast Heaven Pagoda also has its own rules. The god-disciple candidates who come here must abide by the rules of the vast Heaven Pagoda. How can anyone come and go as they please? Tianxing, this is the law of the divine nations. No matter how anxious you are, it's useless." Juju's analysis was clear and logical. Logically and emotionally, it was impossible for Ji Tianxing to leave the vast Heaven Pagoda right now. He deliberated for a moment before asking, "Juju, when can I leave?" Juju looked at him with a solemn expression and said solemnly, "If you are strong enough and can stand out among the geniuses of the 6 nations, you can pass the assessment in half a year and become a god disciple. At that time, The vast heaven pagoda will select the 5 most outstanding powerhouses among the god disciples. These 5 god disciples will represent the vast heaven divine nation and participate in the exchange of the 3 divine nations. At that time, you can leave the vast heaven pagoda and exchange pointers with the god disciples of the other 2 divine nations. At this point, Juju smiled and comforted him. If Yunyaro's talent is outstanding and she can also become one of the top 5 god disciples, then you will be able to see her with your own eyes. Even if you can't see her, you can still communicate with the god disciples of the other 2 divine nations and ask them about your wife's whereabouts. Therefore, Tianxing, you don't have to be anxious. Wait patiently for half a year, then you will know the results. I see. Ji Tianxing nodded, and the worry and anxiety in his heart dissipated. He had made up his mind to cultivate diligently and work hard to improve his strength. He would strive to become one of the top 5 god disciples in half a year. Juju saw that he had calmed down and felt much more relaxed. She reminded him again, Tianxing, although you are the number 1 genius of the Chuyun Empire, the Chuyun Empire is ranked last among the 6 nations. There are many young geniuses in the other 5 empires who are at a higher realm than you, and they will be your strong opponents. In the next half a year, you must work hard to improve your strength. You must not slack off. Otherwise, if you can't become one of the top 5 god disciples, how are you going to find her? After she finished speaking, she waved her hand and shot out a ray of light. She sent the black register to Ji Tianxing. Tianxing, this register is for you. It records the information of all the candidates. Chapter 1503. Ji Tianxing took the black roster and kept it in his interspatial ring. He looked at Juju and said calmly, Juju, thank you. However, I would like to know why you are helping me. Juju gave him a radiant smile and explained, you also said that I'm your only friend here. If I don't help you, who else can? Besides, I have my own plans and motives for helping you. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows. What motives? Of course I can't say. Juju shook her head and said with a chuckle, don't worry. I definitely won't do you any harm. Ji Tianxing looked at her deeply. Seeing her innocent look and her clear and bright eyes, he didn't ask any more questions. In that case, thank you very much. Farewell. He cupped his hands at Juju and left the hall. Not long after, he returned to his room in Chuyun Palace. He entered the secret chamber and took out the black roster. He sat down and read it carefully. There were more than 100 names recorded on the roster. They were the young geniuses from the 6 empires. Everyone's name, age, strength realm, and background were recorded on the roster. It was clear at a glance. Ji Tianxing quietly flipped through the book for an hour. He finished reading all the contents of the book and memorized a lot of important information. Among the 100 young geniuses, the weakest was at the 2nd level of the Essence Soul realm. Most of them were between the 3rd and 5th level of the Essence Soul realm. 14 of them were at the 5th level of the Essence Soul realm like him. In addition, there were 3 people whose strength exceeded his and attracted his attention. The 3 names were recorded in red. Clearly, they were highly valued by the Clear Sky Pagoda. They would definitely be heavily groomed in the future. One of them was called Song Zhanyu. He was a graceful and elegant young master. According to the roster, he was the number 1 young genius of the White Knight Empire. He was also a noble prince and the 7th son of the White Knight Holy Emperor. He had cultivated martial arts for 48 years and had reached the 6th level of the Essence Soul realm. He was famous in the White Knight Empire and was revered and worshipped by hundreds of millions of young warriors. The second genius was called Jiang Ningxue. She was a gentle and graceful beauty. This woman was the number 1 genius of the Thousand Snow Empire. She was born in an ancient aristocratic family. It was said that her bloodline was quite noble. However, her identity and background were not recorded in detail. Only her important information was written on the register. She had cultivated in the martial Tao for 46 years and now possessed strength at the 6th firmament Essence Soul realm. Before participating in the ranking battle, she was almost unknown to the world and kept a low profile. It wasn't until the ranking war that she defeated the 2 strongest geniuses of the Thousand Snow Empire in public and became the number 1 genius in one fell swoop. As far as Ji Tianxing was concerned, both Song Jianyu and Jiang Ningxue were formidable opponents. However, what he truly valued was the third genius. His name was Qin Tsungqiong and he was from the strongest country among the 6 nations, the Blue Dragon Empire. Qin Tsungqiong had cultivated martial arts for 40 years and had reached the peak of the 6th firmament essence soul realm. He could break through to the 7th firmament essence soul realm at any time. Plus, this person was cold, arrogant, and overbearing. He was a proud heaven's favorite. He held the firmament blade in his hand and carried the 1,000 drunks pot all year round. He was dressed in a carefree and unrestrained manner. He used 36 moves of the firmament blade technique and his prestige in the Blue Dragon Empire was unparalleled. In Ji Tianxing's opinion, the 3 of them were all extremely talented geniuses. Among them, Qin Tsungqiong's skills were the most profound and the most mysterious and unpredictable. He had a premonition that Qin Tsungqiong would be his strongest opponent. Although in the assessment half a year later, as long as I become the top 5 god disciples, I will be able to participate in the exchange of the 3 holy kingdoms. However, who would be willing to be second place? Who wouldn't want to be number 1 and become the most dazzling god disciple in the vast holy kingdom? Ji Tianxing murmured softly. His fighting spirit was surging in his heart. When the time came, he would definitely defeat the 3 geniuses and become number 1. After a long time, he kept the register and kept it in his heart. He continued to cultivate. 2 days later, in the morning, when the sun rose, Lin Daoyi suddenly came to Chuyun Palace and ordered for the 15 geniuses to gather. The geniuses who were cultivating in seclusion walked out of their rooms and gathered in the main hall of Chuyun Palace. Everyone had cultivated in seclusion for a few days. When they met again, they realized that their strength and aura had increased imperceptibly. Seeing that everyone was present, Lin Daoyi announced in a dignified voice, "You have been in the Clear Sky Pagoda for 7 days. Today, I have gathered you to participate in the worship ceremony." When they heard about the worship ceremony, more than 10 young geniuses were interested. Some of them were puzzled and interested. Some of them seemed to know about the worship ceremony and looked expectant. Lin Daoyi introduced in a solemn tone, "This is the rule of the Clear Sky Pagoda. Every god disciple candidate who comes to the Clear Sky Pagoda has to worship the Great Divine Master Vast Holy Kingdom. When the time comes, you must maintain a solemn and respectful attitude. Only then can you be baptized by the Divine Master's radiance. If anyone dares to be rude and offends the dignity of the Divine Master, not only will they not be baptized, they will also be severely punished." Everyone was an outstanding martial genius. Of course, they understood the importance and sacredness of this matter. No one dared to offend the dignity of the Divine Master Vast Holy Kingdom. Seeing that everyone understood, Lin Daoyi nodded his head in satisfaction and led everyone out of Chuyun Palace. Under Lin Daoyi's lead, everyone crossed the wide square and walked toward the Divine Palace near the Clear Sky Pagoda. When they crossed the square, they saw groups of young experts walking out of the surrounding palaces. Those were the young geniuses of the various empires. They were all led by a divine envoy and were rushing toward the Divine Palace. This was the first time that Ji Tianxing, Wu Qian, and the others had seen the young geniuses of the other empires. Although everyone did not show any expression, they were secretly sizing up the geniuses of the other empires and discussing secretly. Wu Qian followed behind Ji Tianxing and sized up the groups with a deep gaze. Suddenly, a strange look flashed past his eyes. He transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing, "Young Master Ji, look at the group on the left. They are walking out of the White Knight Palace. They should be the geniuses of the White Knight Empire. The black-robed youth behind the divine envoy seems to be the number 1 genius of the White Knight Empire. That person's strength is not bad. He has actually reached the 6th degree realm." Ji Tianxing glanced at the black-robed youth and found that he was indeed a handsome and elegant young master. He transmitted his voice to Yin Wook, that is Song Jianyu. He is one of the strongest geniuses among the candidates for the god-disciple selection. However, he is not the strongest. The group on the right is from the Thousand Snow Empire. The leader is a girl in a white dress. Her name is Jiang Ningxue and she is not any weaker than Song Jianyu. In the group in front, There is a youth in grey linen clothes and black cloth shoes. He is holding a wine jug in his hand. He is the strongest. Chapter 1504. As Yin Wook listened to Ji Tianxing's words, he sized up Song Zhanyu, Jiang Ningxue, and Qin Sangqiong. He memorized their appearances and Ji Tianxing's words. Then, he asked Ji Tianxing with a confused expression, "Young Master Ji, how do you know these people? And you know them so clearly?" Ji Tianxing calmly replied, "It's a secret." Yin Wook became even more curious and guessed, "Could it be that you didn't cultivate in seclusion these past few days and instead went to the various palaces to gather information?" After saying this, he also felt that it was unlikely. He shook his head and said, "That's impossible. You don't look like someone who would do such a thing." "It's good that you know," Ji Tianxing nonchalantly replied. Yin Wook became even more confused. He frowned and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he revealed an expression of sudden realization. "Oh, I understand. It must be Lin Daoyi who told you. After all, you are the number one genius of your country. Lin Daoyi would naturally take special care of you." Ji Tianxing didn't answer. He didn't comment. While everyone was sizing up the geniuses of the various countries, the geniuses of the 5 great empires were also observing Ji Tianxing, Yin Wook, and the others. The geniuses of the various countries were all proud and arrogant, and they were all competitors. Thus, they looked at the group with cold eyes that even contained a hint of wariness and enmity. Soon, the group arrived outside a resplendent palace. The design and layout of this palace were completely different from the other palaces. It looked like a dark golden dome-shaped temple. This was the temple that worshipped God Lord Taihao. Outside the gate of the temple, there was a spacious square. The ground was paved with huge black stones. A massive ancient stone stele stood in the plaza, densely carved with words that recorded the great achievements of God Lord Taihao and the origin of the clear heaven pagoda. In the corner of the plaza, there were several black stone pillars more than 100 feet tall, carved with the images of ancient beasts. They appeared rather mysterious. Over 100 geniuses from the 6 nations gathered on the black stone plaza and stood in 6 groups. 6 oracles dressed in robes of different colors stood side by side in front of the team, bowing and kowtowing to the gate of the temple. "We have brought our disciples to pay our respects to divine Lord Taihao." The 6 of them shouted in unison, their tone solemn and respectful. The heavy doors of the temple slowly opened, and a burly, domineering middle-aged man walked out of the temple. This person had white hair and bronze skin. His eyes were large and bright, as vast as the starry sky. He stepped through the gate of the temple and stood on the steps outside. With his hands behind his back, he looked at the crowd with a dignified expression. The 6 divine envoys immediately bowed respectfully and said, "Greetings, Great Guardian." The hundreds of young geniuses also bowed to the Great Guardian. The Great Guardian nodded slightly and waved his palms slowly. He drew out a mysterious seal and chanted an ancient and obscure spell. As he finished casting the spell, an invisible divine power of heaven and earth enveloped the entire temple. The temple instantly exploded with dazzling golden light, making it seem as divine as a celestial palace. This was a necessary part of the worship ceremony, and it had always been this way. Once the Great Guardian was done, he turned and stepped into the temple. The 6 divine envoys then led the young geniuses into the vast temple. The interior of the temple was extremely solemn. In the north was a high platform, upon which stood a dark golden statue 100 feet tall. This statue depicted divine Lord Taihao, and it was so lifelike that it seemed almost lifelike. Divine Lord Taihao wore a suit of dark golden armor, a wide golden battle robe, and a simple but dignified divine crown on his head. Divine Lord Taihao was seated on a massive throne, his posture upright and dignified. His body exuded a divine aura that seemed to look down upon the world. In his left hand was a divine kingdom codex, while in his right hand was a broad and heavy divine sword. This codex represented the divine Lord's authority, implying that the laws of the divine kingdom governed the world and ensured eternal peace for its people. The sheathed divine sword represented the divine Lord's absolute martial strength, implying that the divine Lord used the sword to expand his territory and protect his divine kingdom. Behind the Divine Lord statue, the entire wall was covered in reliefs, depicting millions of miles of mountains, rivers, and stars. There were also many words and symbols carved into it. In short, all the young geniuses who had entered the temple were stunned by this divine majesty. Although Divine Lord Taihao's statue was made of precious stones and refining materials, it was not alive. But it possessed the aura of a divine lord, exuding a pressure that could suppress the world. It was like a divine lord had personally arrived. Everyone put aside their distracting thoughts and lined up in neat rows, maintaining a solemn and dignified demeanor. No one made a single noise. The 6 divine envoys stood on the left and right sides of the temple, their hands hanging at their sides. The great guardian walked up to Divine Lord Taihao's statue and piously began to recite a long, ancient language. At this moment, Ji Tianxing stood motionless in the crowd, his eyes fixed on Divine Lord Taihao's statue, a strange light flashing through them. For some reason, ever since he had stepped into the temple, his mind had been uneasy, his origin spirit throbbing. When he saw Divine Lord Taihao's statue clearly, his origin spirit trembled, various fragmented scenes appearing in his mind. A sense of familiarity that originated from the depths of his soul flooded his origin spirit, spreading to every nerve in his body. His mind was in chaos, his consciousness somewhat hazy. His body stiffened, his limbs no longer listening to his commands. He could clearly sense that something sealed deep within his soul had unwittingly shattered. Many ancient and complex images and information were surging in his mind, ready to explode at any moment. This strange and unusual feeling was something he had never experienced before. It made him feel both puzzled and shocked. But at this moment, the great guardian finished reciting his incantation. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and bowed to the Divine Lord's statue, then he called out to the crowd, "Let the worship ceremony begin. Disciples, kneel. May Lord Divine Lord's glory last forever." Upon hearing such a solemn and dignified voice, the 100 or so young geniuses all knelt reverently on the ground, their hearts brimming with devotion. Everyone placed their palms flat on the ground, their foreheads pressed against the ground as they maintained a prostrating posture. The great guardian's dignified gaze swept across the temple. Seeing that all the divine envoys were kneeling, he prepared to recite the second verse. But when he saw Ji Tianxing, his gaze froze, and he fiercely frowned. This was because while everyone in the temple was prostrating on the ground, only Ji Tianxing was still standing. Not only was he standing ramrod straight, but he was also staring straight at Divine Lord Taihao's statue with a blank expression, without the slightest bit of respect. Chapter 1505. Everyone was kneeling down devoutly. Only Ji Tianxing did not kneel and even dared to look straight at the Divine Master statue. This was absolutely a great disrespect. This was the first time the Great Protector had encountered such a thing in the hundreds of years he had been overseeing the vast heaven pagoda. He did not recite the holy text. His sharp gaze stared at Ji Tianxing, and anger was written all over his face. A formless pressure was released from his body and suppressed towards Ji Tianxing. In order not to affect the worship ceremony, he chose to use this method to remind Ji Tianxing. He believed that even if the white-robed youth was momentarily absent-minded, he would definitely kneel down respectfully after being reminded. Swoosh! The formless pressure enveloped Ji Tianxing, causing his body to tremble twice. His face also became ghastly pale. However, he did not have any reaction. He still stood tall and straight with his eyes looking straight at the Divine Master statue. His expression was still changing. Seeing this scene, the Great Protector was instantly enraged. He thought to himself, "Damn brat, you actually ignored my reminder and still dare to be so rude." The worship ceremony could not proceed for the time being. The Great Protector stared coldly at Ji Tianxing and scolded in a deep voice, "You junior, how dare you? You actually dare to offend the Divine Master's dignity and disrupt the worship ceremony. You really don't know what's good for you. Why aren't you kneeling down and admitting your guilt?" The Great Protector's angry roar suddenly sounded like thunder exploding in the main hall. The hundreds of young geniuses and the 6 divine envoys were all shocked. Everyone turned their heads and looked around the main hall. Finally, their gazes fell on Ji Tianxing. Seeing him standing stiffly on the spot with his eyes looking straight at the Divine Master statue, Everyone's expression changed drastically. They revealed complicated expressions. Most of the young geniuses were shocked and puzzled by this. They secretly sized up Ji Tianxing and discussed in whispers. Who is this guy? He actually dares to behave atrociously in the temple. Is he tired of living? This is the most sacred worship ceremony. Everyone is kneeling down to worship. He actually dares to stand. Looks like he's from the Chu Yun Empire. What a disgrace. Is that brat crazy? How dare he lose his composure in front of the Divine Master's statue? Isn't that courting death? The head protector is furious. This brat is Finnish. He will definitely be punished severely, and even expelled from the vast heaven pagoda. The geniuses of the various countries all looked on coldly as if they were watching a good show. The young geniuses of the Chu Yun Empire were even more shocked, and their expressions became even more complicated. Ji Tianxing has always been arrogant and condescending. I didn't expect him to behave so atrociously in the shrine. That damned bastard. Don't drag us into this mess. When Kuang Long and Lan Yiqing came back to their senses, a cold light flashed in their eyes as they sneered inwardly. Ha ha ha. I really underestimated this guy. I didn't expect him to be so arrogant that he even dares to offend the Divine Master. Originally, I was still cultivating diligently, vowing to surpass him and personally kill him for revenge. Who would have thought that he would offend the Divine Master's dignity in front of so many people? This was a heinous crime. The head protector will definitely punish him severely. It would be best if he is expelled from the vast heaven pagoda. Then, the honor of being the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire will return to my hand. Yin Wuqiu was standing behind Ji Tianxing. When he saw this scene, his heart was burning with anxiety, and his eyes were filled with worry. He hurriedly transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing and shouted, "Young Master Ji, what are you standing there for? Quickly kneel down and pay your respect." Ji Tianxing. You despicable brat, we are in the shrine now. Don't be stupid. Yin Wuqiu shouted anxiously. He was so anxious that his face had turned red. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing did not respond. He also ignored Yin Wuqiu's voice, and his body was still stiff as he stood there. Lin Daoyi also frowned, and a look of worry and anger flashed in his eyes. When he saw that Ji Tianxing had become the center of attention and was being criticized and mocked, he hurriedly shouted coldly, "Ji Tianxing, you are in the shrine. Do not be rude." However, Ji Tianxing still did not respond. He did not make a sound, and he did not move. He was like a wooden puppet. No one knew that just now, an invisible layer of shackles in the depths of his soul had been broken. Some memories and images sealed in the depths of his soul surged out like a tide, drowning his primordial spirit. His consciousness was swallowed by a black whirlpool, and a vast image appeared in the depths of his soul. In the sky above a vast sea of clouds, 2 figures stood proudly. The figure on the left was a valiant man wearing golden armor and a wide cape. This person was tall and muscular, and his face was dignified. He exuded a domineering aura that looked down on all living things. When he saw this person's face clearly, Ji Tianxing was shocked. This person looked exactly the same as the statue of Divine Master Taihao in the shrine. Obviously, this man in golden armor was martial god Taihao. In the white sea of clouds beneath his feet, half of a dark golden pagoda was revealed. It shone with a sacred golden light. Ji Tianxing immediately recognized that it was the clear sky pagoda. He looked at the second figure in the image. It was a tall young man in white robes. His face was resolute and cold. His eyebrows were sharp and his eyes were bright. His eyes contained a domineering aura that looked down on the world. His attire was rather simple. He only wore a snow-white robe and a pair of black cloth shoes. He had a silver belt around his waist, and his long hair was tied up with a green hairband. When Ji Tianxing saw his face clearly, a trace of fear flashed in the depths of his soul. This white-robed young man's appearance was exactly the same as his, without the slightest difference. However, this white-robed young man was not him, but Kenshin. At this moment, martial god Taihao bowed to Kenshin and said solemnly, "I've long heard of Kenshin's name. It's my honor to invite Kenshin to Mount God Bestowment." Kenshin looked at martial god Taihao calmly and nodded slightly. He asked, "Why are you looking for me?" Martial god Taihao did not answer. Instead, he asked, "I heard that Kenshin once sparred with Luo Shuei and defeated her in 3 moves. He also enlightened Luo Shuei and made her divine power reach the perfection stage." "That's true," Kenshin nodded calmly. Martial god Taihao's eyes flickered. He said with anticipation, "I've always admired Kenshin, and I've long wanted to get to know you. Besides, I believe that my sword principle has reached the perfection stage. No one in the world can defeat me. If I can't spar with you, it'll be my greatest regret." Kenshin had expected this. He nodded calmly and said, "Please make your move." Martial god Taihao's palm flashed with golden light. A divine sword with a golden sheath appeared, and he assumed a stance. "Kenshin, draw your sword." Kenshin shook his head and said calmly, "The sword is in the heart, between the heavens and earth, outside of the rift. It's not in the hand." Chapter 1506. Martial god Taihao's eyes flickered, and he hurriedly bowed to Kenshin. He said with admiration, "So that's how it is. Thank you, Kenshin, for enlightening me." Taihao admitted defeat, and he accepted his defeat wholeheartedly. As the ancients say, if one learns of the Tao in the morning, one can die without regret. Today, after hearing Kenshin's words, Taihao finally understood the mysteries of the way of the sword. It was boundless and limitless. "It's laughable that I used to brag that I was number 1 in the way of the sword, and that I was invincible in the Shunwu continent. I was really too blind." Martial god Taihao seemed to have gained enlightenment, and he instantly broke through the shackles of the martial way, discovering an even wider realm of the martial way. He was rather moved, and he was also very respectful towards Kenshin. He accepted him wholeheartedly. After a while, the image gradually faded, and it was about to dissipate. At that moment, a thunderous sound suddenly rang out in Ji Tianqing's soul, jolting him back to his senses. "How dare you! Kneel down and admit your sins." Following this explosive shout, before Ji Tianqing could figure out what was going on, he felt a sharp pain in his body, and his origin spirit began to tremble violently. Boom! Everyone in the shrine had personally witnessed Ji Tianqing being struck by the head protector's palm, and he spat out a mouthful of blood as he flew back dozens of meters. After that, he landed on the ground of the shrine with a bang, and he rolled a few times before coming to a stop. The shrine was silent, and the young geniuses from various countries revealed complicated expressions. Some were in awe of the head protector's might, while others felt pity for Ji Tianqing's fate. There were also a few who rejoiced in his misfortune. As for Quang Long and Lan Yiqing, the sneers in their eyes became even thicker, and they felt even more pleased and carefree. Only Yin Wook ignored everyone's strange gazes and hurriedly crawled up from the ground to support Ji Tianqing. However, just as he rushed to Ji Tianqing's side, he was shouted back by the head protector. "Back off. Go back and kneel properly, otherwise, you will be punished as well." The head protector's angry shout caused Yin Wook's body to tremble, and his footsteps became stiff. The pressure of a martial saint enveloped his entire body, and he did not dare to move recklessly. He had no doubt that the great guardian only needed a single thought to crush him into pieces. Lin Daoyi also hurriedly transmitted a message to him, telling him to retreat quickly and not make any mistakes. Yin Wuqiu's expression was extremely ugly. His gaze changed. After hesitating and struggling for a moment, he retreated step by step. Enduring great torment and humiliation, he returned to his original position and silently knelt down. At the same time, Ji Tianqing, who was lying on the ground vomiting blood, slowly stood up. The great guardian's palm strike had not only shattered the image in the depths of his soul and awakened him, but it had also severely injured him. A sharp pain came from his internal organs, as if thousands of needles were stabbing him. He slowly lifted his sleeve to wipe off the blood at the corner of his mouth. His face was expressionless as he coldly swept his gaze across the hall and looked at the great guardian. Only now did he understand what had just happened. When everyone was kowtowing, he became absent-minded and stood out from the crowd, which infuriated the great guardian. However, he did not intend to explain himself. When the great guardian saw that Yin Wuqiu had regained consciousness, his anger dissipated slightly. He shouted with a dignified expression, "Men, take down this bastard who offended the Divine Master's dignity and disturbed the worship ceremony." As soon as his voice fell, 2 guards in golden armor immediately rushed in from outside the door. Swish swish. 2 golden-armored protectors flew to Ji Tianxing's side, one on the left and one on the right, and used their magic power to suppress him. Lin Daoyi frowned and hurriedly cupped his hands towards the Great Guardian. He pleaded, "Great Guardian, please wait. This disciple's surname is Ji and his name is Tianxing. I have mentioned him to you before. This person has just arrived and does not know the rules of the temple. Perhaps he was intimidated by the Divine Master's dignity, which is why he lost his composure in front of everyone. Great Guardian, please give him a way out." Lin Daoyi was obviously hinting to the Great Guardian that this person was the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire and had unlimited potential. However, the Great Guardian glanced at him coldly and shouted in a deep voice, "The vast heaven pagoda is the place where Lord Divine Master imparts the Tao. It is the martial holy land of the 6 nations. How sacred is it? No matter who comes here, everyone is treated equally and must abide by the Divine Kingdom's laws and the vast heaven pagoda's rules. This child offended the Divine Master's dignity in front of everyone and disturbed the worship ceremony. This is an unforgivable crime. Divine Envoy Lin, how do you want this seat to show mercy? Could it be that this seat is going to sit by and watch him offend the Divine Master?" Lin Daoyi was instantly speechless. The Great Guardian spoke righteously. Even if he wanted to plead for Ji Tianxing, he was powerless. Helpless, he could only bow and retreat. The Great Guardian's dignified gaze swept across everyone and said in a deep voice, "According to the Divine Kingdom's laws, Ji Tianxing despised the Divine Master and disturbed the worship ceremony. He should be punished with 70 lashes. Immediately escort him to the plaza outside the temple and tie him to a stone pillar. This seat will personally execute him." The 2 golden-armored guards acknowledged the order and escorted Ji Tianxing out of the temple and toward the plaza. Only then did everyone understand that the mysterious black stone pillars in the corner of the plaza were actually used for execution. In a short while, the 2 guards escorted Ji Tianxing to the black stone pillar and used a black iron chain with an array to tie him to the stone pillar. The Great Guardian also walked to the stone pillar and reached out to take a dark red long whip from the guards. This long whip was 30 feet long and as thick as a child's arm. It was dark red in color and was surrounded by fierce red flames. This whip was not an ordinary item. It was a top primordial soul realm magic treasure that was refined with external astral fire. If it was whipped on a person's body, not only would the flesh and blood rupture, but the person would also be burned to ashes. Even the primordial soul would be severely injured and suffer extreme pain. If an ordinary primordial soul realm powerhouse was whipped 70 times by the heavenly fire whip, he would definitely be severely injured and would need to recuperate for a few years to recover. Ji Tianxing was tied to the black stone pillar and could not resist at all. He could only silently endure the punishment. Many young geniuses in the temple, as well as the 6 divine messengers, were secretly paying attention to what was happening in the plaza. Everyone's expression was rather complicated as they secretly communicated with each other through voice transmission. No one had expected such a thing to happen in this year's selection of God's disciples. There were some who sympathized with Ji Tianxing, some who despised him, and some who gloated over his misfortune. In a short while, the Great Guardian held a book of God's nation code in his hands and read out Ji Tianxing's crimes and the corresponding punishment with a dignified expression. Then, he held the heavenly fire whip in his hands and prepared to execute the punishment. Swoosh! He activated a vast amount of Dharma power and infused it into the heavenly fire whip. The long whip immediately became as straight as a sword and burst out billowing waves of fire. The Great Guardian waved his right hand and held the heavenly fire whip in his hand as he whipped Ji Tianxing fiercely. Smack! A crisp sound of an explosion was heard. The long whip with flames rising from it viciously lashed Ji Tianxing's chest. Suddenly, his white robe was torn open, and a dark red bloodstain appeared on his white jade-like skin. At the chopstick long wound, the flesh and blood were curling outwards. The surface of the skin and flesh had been charred and was emitting wisps of black smoke. Fortunately, His body had been tempered and his defense was extremely strong. Chapter 1507. Seeing this, the great guardian was stunned for a moment and frowned in confusion. He knew very well that the power of the heavenly fire whip could not be so weak. He was puzzled and was about to increase the strength of the whip to execute the punishment again. However, at this moment, a strong wind suddenly blew in the square. Whoosh! A strong wind came from nowhere and swept across the entire peak of Mount Godseal. The colorful spiritual fog that covered the sky was suddenly blown away by the strong wind. The calm and clear sky was also filled with wind and clouds. Endless black clouds surged in from all directions, gathering in the sky above the temple and the square, causing the world to darken. Purple lightning arcs flashed wildly in the dark clouds and gathered together quickly. Seeing the change in the sky, the great guardian was stunned. His eyes were filled with shock and confusion. The 6 divine messengers and hundreds of young geniuses in the temple also looked at the square with confusion. They did not understand what was happening. The great guardian frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he was enlightened. He pointed at the sky and scolded Ji Tianxing sternly, "Rebellious disciple, do you see this? You have offended the dignity of the divine master and angered the heavens. This is the wrath of the heavens. I will punish you severely to appease the anger of the heavens and protect the dignity of the divine master." As he spoke, he raised the heavenly fire whip again and injected a vast amount of spiritual power into the long whip. The flames of the heavenly fire whip grew and its power doubled. Swoosh! The great guardian raised the heavenly fire whip and lashed it at Ji Tianxing fiercely. The powerful heavenly fire whip was about to hit Ji Tianxing's chest. At this moment, a dazzling bolt of lightning suddenly lit up in the dark clouds that covered the sky and struck down toward the square. Kaboom! A deafening sound exploded in the sky and spread across the entire Mount Godseal. A lightning pillar that was thousands of feet tall tore the dark sky apart like a divine dragon and struck the black stone pillar at the corner of the square. Ji Tianxing, the chief enforcer, and the black stone pillar were instantly engulfed by the endless lightning. The stone pillar, which was more than 100 feet tall, was smashed into pieces on the spot. Gravel flew everywhere. An incomparably violent shockwave swept through the entire plaza, along with gravel and lightning arcs. The ferocious heavenly fire whip was actually split into several pieces by the divine lightning and fell into the rubble. The great guardian was also sent flying by the divine thunder and smashed into the square 1,000 feet away. His entire body was charred black, his clothes were ragged, and his long hair was disheveled and curled up with black smoke. Previously, he still had a dignified aura, but now, his head and face were covered in dust, and he was in an extremely sorry state. However, he had the strength of a martial sage and he was not seriously injured when he was suddenly struck by the sacred lightning. He only ended up in a pathetic state. After a while, the dust and black smoke that filled the sky gradually dispersed. The great guardian crawled up from the ground and saw the situation in the corner of the square. Ji Tianxing, who was wearing a white robe, was actually standing on top of the ruins, completely unharmed. Other than that bloody scar on his chest from being lashed out by the heavenly fire whip, there were no other injuries on his entire body. Seeing this scene, the great guardian was dumbfounded on the spot and cried out in disbelief. Wasn't he struck by the sacred lightning? How can he be safe and sound? No, there must be some problem, absolutely impossible. A dignified martial sage, the chief enforcer who guarded the vast heaven pagoda, was shocked until he could not be any more shocked, and his state of mind was already in chaos. However, the great changes in heaven and earth were not over yet. Right at this time, an even more shocking scene appeared. God-Ceiling Mountain, which was several thousand feet tall and resembled a giant pillar holding up the sky, actually shook violently. The entire giant mountain trembled, giving off a loud rumbling sound as if it was going to collapse. Many palaces and houses also cracked open with cracks, scattering countless gold bricks and glazed tiles. In the plaza outside the temple, the ground also cracked open with a huge ravine, bursting out dust that filled the sky. The scene of the earth shaking was as if doomsday had arrived. Black clouds pressed down in the sky as lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The earth shook violently, splitting open countless ravines. Even the sacred vast heaven pagoda, which pierced into the clouds, also shook violently, bursting with golden light. Things had developed to such a stage that the worship ceremony had already been completely destroyed. The 6 divine messengers and hundreds of young geniuses all rushed out of the temple in a hurry and rushed to the plaza outside the temple. They saw that the plaza had long been distorted and broken, and the ground was covered with wide ravines and gravel. The chief enforcer was covered in dust, and his hair was disheveled as he stood in the plaza. Ji Tianxing, who was dressed in a white robe, stood in the corner of the plaza, safe and sound, his expression cold. The divine messengers and young geniuses were dumbfounded when they saw this scene, completely unable to understand what was going on. The sudden change filled everyone with fear, and they were at a loss for what to do. No one would have thought that such a shocking astronomical change would occur in the martial arts sanctuary that had always been peaceful and auspicious. This was simply illogical. After everyone regained their senses, they all started to discuss doubtfully. "Oh my God! How could this be? What exactly happened just now? Why did heaven and earth change so much, and why did the sacred lightning strike? What's wrong with the chief enforcer? Could it be that he was struck by the sacred lightning? Ji Tianxing was actually not injured. This is impossible. He offended the Divine Master's majesty and angered the Divine Master. He should be struck to death by the sacred lightning." For some time, the plaza was noisy and very chaotic. Fortunately, God-Sealing Mountain gradually calmed down and stopped shaking. The violent hurricane that filled heaven and earth, the black clouds that covered the sky, and the lightning in the clouds also gradually dissipated. The chief enforcer saw that everyone was in a mess and hurriedly tidied up his appearance, recovering his dignified posture. He pointed at Ji Tianxing with a face full of anger, and said in an icy and dignified tone, "I believe that everyone saw it. It was precisely because Ji Tianxing offended the Divine Master's majesty that he angered the Divine Master. This madman committed treason, causing heaven and earth to change dramatically. The sacred mountain shook, and sacred lightning fell from the sky. This is the Divine Master's fury and punishment. The vast heaven pagoda already can't tolerate him." Hearing the chief enforcer's explanation, everyone came to a realization and nodded repeatedly to express their agreement. Especially Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the rest, their faces were full of cold smiles, their eyes surging with a biting cold light. A green-robed divine envoy hurriedly chimed in and shouted with righteous indignation, "For 1,000 years, there has never been an accident here. God-Sealing Mountain is a martial arts sanctuary that has always been peaceful. But today, Ji Tianxing offended the Divine Master's majesty and disrupted the worship ceremony. He actually caused a monstrous disaster. This envoy suggests that he must be severely punished to appease the Divine Master's anger." Chapter 1508. The great change in heaven and earth just now made everyone both shocked and furious. The divine envoys all agreed with the head protector's decision. Lin Daoyi also did not dare to plead for Ji Tianxing when he saw that things had developed to such a stage. Everyone understood that Sealed God Mountain suffered such a drastic change and suffered heavy losses. Ji Tianxing must be severely punished to settle this matter. The head protector took out the Divine Kingdom's law and read out the law with a dignified voice, condemning Ji Tianxing in front of everyone. Ji Tianxing committed treason and blasphemed the Divine Master's dignity. He is not fit to be a divine disciple. According to the Divine Kingdom's law, Ji Tianxing's status as a divine disciple candidate will be immediately abolished and demoted to a divine servant. He will be punished to be sent to the Spirit Beast Valley as a slave. Within 3 years, Ji Tianxing will raise spirit beasts in the Spirit Beast Valley as a sinner and cannot leave his post without permission. After 3 years, we will observe the consequences. Hearing the head protector announce the punishment result, everyone revealed strange expressions. However, the vast majority of people agreed with the head protector's decision. There were even people who felt that the head protector's punishment for Ji Tianxing was already merciful enough. Ji Tianxing stared at the head protector coldly and said in an indifferent tone, "You are a martial saint powerhouse, the head protector guarding the vast heaven pagoda, but you are so muddle-headed and ignorant. I only made an unintentional mistake. But as the person in charge of the vast heaven pagoda, you do not have the heart of a benevolent person. You can't tolerate people's mistakes at all and easily inflict severe torture. When you were torturing me, the heavens were furious and sent down heavenly punishment, destroying the punishment whip and stone pillar. You also did not distinguish right from wrong and used your own conjecture to mislead the public and presume to convict me. You are arbitrary and not fit to guard the Tao field for martial god Tai Hao. You are even more unfit to be the head protector and be in charge of the vast heaven pagoda. Now that things have come to this, not only do you not reflect on your own mistakes, you still want to act willfully and expel me from the vast heaven pagoda. Are you not afraid that heavenly punishment will descend again and turn the entire vast heaven pagoda into ashes? The cold and sonorous voice spread throughout the entire plaza, shaking everyone's heart and soul. His tone and expression were filled with an unparalleled domineering aura. His entire body erupted with invisible divine might that fiercely suppressed everyone. At that moment, everyone's primordial spirits were in a daze, and they had an illusion. It was as if the person standing in front of everyone was not a young genius, but a god who looked down on the world and controlled the universe. That formless divine might that looked down on the heavens and earth actually caused the great protector's body to stiffen. His eyes were filled with shock for a long time. After a while, he calmed down and exclaimed in his heart, "This brat only has the strength of an essence spirit realm cultivator. How could he release divine might to intimidate my essence spirit and make me feel fearful?" The 6 divine messengers and the geniuses also came to their senses. No one had expected that after the divine punishment incident, Ji Tianxing's first words would not be to plead for mercy, but to reprimand the great guardian. He actually used an incomparably unyielding attitude and pitilessly domineering aura to belittle the great protector to the point that he was worthless. It felt as if the heavenly punishment was under his control, and it was specifically used to punish the great guardian. Everyone's expression changed drastically, and they began to discuss secretly through voice transmission. "Oh my God! Is this brat crazy? How dare he reprimand the great protector so arrogantly? Is he trying to push all the blame away? Too arrogant. This brat's arrogance is simply appalling and unprecedented. TSK, TSK, TSK. This has never happened in hundreds of years, and this brat is suddenly famous. This incident will soon spread to all the countries, right? No matter how arrogant he is, it's useless. He will not have a good ending if he goes against the great protector." The great protector also frowned and stared at Ji Tianxing fiercely. He shouted angrily, "Ji Tianxing, you are so arrogant that you have lost your mind. Men, take down this crazy man who is spouting nonsense and immediately send him to the Spirit Beast Valley for punishment." The great protector did not want to waste any more time with him, and he immediately waved his hand to give the order. In fact, he was also a little worried that if he continued to tangle with Ji Tianxing, it would bring about another great change in heaven and earth and the divine punishment. 4 guards in golden armor immediately flew towards Ji Tianxing, wanting to capture him on the spot. But at this moment, a majestic voice came from the edge of the square. "Her Royal Highness has arrived." Instantly, the great protector, the 6 gods' messengers, and the geniuses from various countries turned their heads to look at the edge of the square. They saw a team of guards in golden armor, carrying an exquisite and luxurious half-moon-shaped throne, running towards the center of the square. On both sides of the throne, there were 2 female guards in silver armor, holding halberds in their hands. On the golden throne, there was a little girl who was 3 feet tall and looked like she was carved from jade. The little girl was wearing a fiery red long dress, and she was barefooted. She had a head of light golden hair, and she looked very cute. But her little face was tense, and her expression was cold. Her aura was also very majestic. Seeing this, many geniuses were puzzled. Which country's princess was this? When the great protector and the 6 gods' messengers saw the arrival of the little princess's throne, their faces turned solemn and respectful. "Welcome, Your Royal Highness." The great protector and the 6 gods' messengers immediately went up and bowed in unison. Seeing this, the geniuses from various countries were shocked and their eyes were filled with shock. The great protector of the martial sage realm and the 6 gods' messengers are actually so respectful to the princess. The 7 white-haired top powers, whose ages added up to a few thousand years, are actually so respectful to the little girl. Even if the 6 sage emperors were present, they would not receive such treatment, let alone the princesses of various empires. At this thought, the geniuses from various countries immediately guessed the identity of Her Royal Highness. This little princess was definitely not the princess of any empire, but the princess of the Holy Kingdom. In the blink of an eye, the guards in golden armor carried the throne to the center of the square and stood still. Sitting on the throne, Juju looked down at the great protector and the 6 gods' messengers and said coldly, "A good ceremony to worship has been completely ruined by you." Her cold voice was filled with anger. The great protector and the 6 gods' messengers were instantly shocked, and they lowered their heads in fear. Ordinary people would not be able to interact with Her Royal Highness Juju, and they would not know her character. However, the great protector and the rest knew that although Her Royal Highness looked cute, once she was enraged, she would definitely be a demonic girl who would destroy the heavens and earth. The great protector was nervous and he quickly explained, "My Royal Highness, just now in the Holy Hall, I was conducting the ceremony to worship the princess." Ji Tianxing was arrogant and rude and offended the Holy Master. However, before he could explain what had happened, Juju waved her small hand and interrupted him. "Of course I know what had happened. You don't have to say anything." When the great protector saw that she was filled with anger, he thought that she was angry because the ceremony had been ruined and the mountain peak had been destroyed. Therefore, he quickly reported, "My Royal Highness, please calm down. This matter was due to my negligence. I did not expel Ji Tianxing in time and caused the Holy Master to be angry and the heavens and earth to change. According to the laws of the Holy Nation, I have announced Ji Tianxing's crime and punishment in public. His status as a candidate for God's disciple will be abolished and he will be demoted to a servant. He will be sent to the Spirit Beast Valley." Juju looked at the great protector coldly. After he finished speaking, she reprimanded him coldly, "That's right. As the great protector, you did not manage the situation and you did not do your duty. However, do you think that the heavens and earth changed and the scene of the holy thunder were really caused by the Holy Master's anger? How holy and merciful is the Holy Master? How broad was his mind? How could it be something that you could imagine? How can the Holy Master send down such a punishment and anger just because a person was disrespectful?" When the great protector heard what she had said, he was stunned. The 6 gods' messengers and many geniuses also changed their expressions. The same thought appeared in everyone's mind. If the scene of the wind, clouds, thunder, and lightning and the heavens and earth changing was not caused by the Holy Master's anger and holy punishment, then what was it? If the holy thunder of punishment and the heavens and earth changing were not to punish Ji Tianxing, were they to punish the great protector? Chapter 1509. Everyone found it hard to believe Juju's words, and they were all shocked. However, Juju's identity was unparalleled. Among everyone present, only she was qualified to say such words, and only she understood Divine Lord Taihao. After all, she was the princess of the God Nation, the daughter of the Divine Lord. If she believed that the great change in the world was not caused by the Divine Lord's anger, then it was definitely not. Just as everyone was in a daze, Juju announced in a dignified tone, "The Divine Lord has always been wise and virtuous, and cherishes talents. This is known to all the citizens of the God Nation. The Great Guardian's judgment is a little unreasonable, and does not fit the Divine Lord's benevolence. Therefore, I now announce that Ji Tianxing's status as a candidate for a God's disciple will be restored, and he will be punished to clean the Divine Book Pavilion for half a year. This is a small punishment." Hearing this, the Great Guardian and the messenger's expressions changed drastically, and they stared at Juju with their eyes wide open. They could not believe it and could not understand. Everyone was extremely confused, and they exclaimed to themselves, "Why would the Little Highness make such a judgment? This is too unreasonable, isn't it? Punishing Ji Tianxing to clean the Divine Book Pavilion? Isn't this an overt punishment and a covert reward? The Divine Book Pavilion is the top secret place of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and it contains countless ancient books, Taoist scriptures, and secret skills. Not to mention ordinary God's disciples, even messengers like us only have the chance to enter once or twice a year. The Little Highness actually wants Ji Tianxing to clean the Divine Book Pavilion. Isn't this a great gift and reward? The Little Highness's decision must have a deeper meaning. What ability does this Ji Tianqing have to be able to obtain His Highness's protection and appreciation? Not only the Great Guardian and the God Masters had complicated expressions, but their hearts were also filled with shock and confusion. There were also a few young geniuses who had heard of the Divine Book Pavilion of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and they knew that it was the holy land of books that the experts of the 6 nations dreamed of. These geniuses were Qin Tsangqiong, Jiang Ningxue, Song Zhanyu, and the rest. They frowned in confusion, and looked at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes. They were very wary of him. They were all very clear that Ji Tianqing must have some outstanding aspects, which was why he could cause such a big disturbance and even obtain the protection of the little princess. On the surface, punishing Ji Tianqing to the Divine Book Pavilion to clean was the little princess's punishment for him. But in reality, this was a huge benefit. The thousands of ancient books and records in the Divine Book Pavilion, as well as all kinds of divine skills, were all open for Ji Tianqing to read and study. Even if the geniuses were to clean the Divine Book Pavilion, they would be more than happy to oblige. The Great Guardian frowned and pondered for a moment. He then cupped his hands and said to Juju, "Your Highness, you're being too merciful by punishing Ji Tianqing like this." Without waiting for him to finish, Juju waved her hand and said with a dignified expression, "I have already made up my mind. Carry it out immediately. There must be no mistakes." The words that the Great Guardian didn't say were all stuffed back down his throat. He could only respectfully bow and say, "Yes, sir." Then, the golden-armored guards carried the throne and left the square. The few divine envoys also brought the geniuses from the various countries out of the square and returned to their residences. The Great Guardian glanced at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression before ordering the guards to escort Ji Tianqing to the Divine Book Pavilion. 2 golden-armored guards, one on the left and one on the right, escorted Ji Tianqing to the vast Heaven Pagoda. The Divine Book Pavilion was located at the top of the vast Heaven Pagoda. It was heavily guarded and a true divine level array was set up. Even if a martial saint expert came, they could not possibly force their way into the Divine Book Pavilion either. When Ji Tianqing trio walked to the bottom of the vast Heaven Pagoda and was about to enter the wide and solemn door, a team of golden-armored guards carried a throne and arrived outside the door of the vast Heaven Pagoda. On the half-moon-shaped throne sat a little girl who looked like she was carved from jade. It was Juju. Ji Tianqing trio stopped in their tracks. The 2 golden-armored guards hurriedly knelt down and bowed to Juju. Juju waved her hand, indicating for the 2 guards to retreat for the time being. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a somewhat complicated expression. With a calm tone, she warned, "Tianqing, I can only help you up to this point. I know that the God-Disciple examination in half a year is very important to you. In this half a year, you can stay in the Divine Book Pavilion and work hard on your cultivation." Ji Tianqing naturally knew that Juju punished him to clean up the Divine Book Pavilion as a special favor to him. He nodded to Juju and said with a sincere tone, "Juju, thank you for helping me so much." Juju was still a little worried. She warned again, "Tianqing, since such a thing has happened in the vast Heaven Pagoda, I must return to the divine country to resolve this matter. The Great Guardian is a fair and strict person, and even a little unreasonable. After I leave, I may have to wait for a few months before returning. In this half a year, try not to go out. Just stay in the Divine Book Pavilion and don't have any conflicts with the Great Guardian." Ji Tianqing nodded with a calm expression and did not say anything. As for the truth of the matter, only he knew in his heart. Previously, he had already reprimanded the Great Guardian in front of everyone. At this moment, he did not want to explain anything. After that, Juju bid farewell to him and left on the throne. 2 golden-armored guards brought Ji Tianqing into the vast Heaven Pagoda. The interior of the sacred and lofty vast Heaven Pagoda was also very solemn. The hall was vast and magnificent. Normally, the vast Heaven Pagoda's doors were always tightly shut. It was rarely opened. All the God disciples and candidates were not allowed to enter without orders and permission. The first and second levels of the Divine Pagoda were spacious and bright halls. There were rows of black stone doors in the surroundings. Every stone door was tightly shut. Mysterious and profound arrays were carved on it, as well as various special patterns. Different names were written on the lintel of the doors. For example, Small Spirit Sky, Pure Jade Sea, Lava World, Ancient Desolate Desert, and so on. Ji Tianxing roughly glanced at it. He felt puzzled and secretly guessed. Could it be that behind those stone doors, there are secret rooms with different environments? Or could it be that every stone door has a passageway that leads to different alternate spaces? After 15 minutes, the two golden armored guards brought him to the 5th level of the vast heaven pagoda. The 5th and 6th levels of the divine pagoda were the sacred divine book chambers. There were thousands of ancient books, ancient records, and secret techniques. The two golden armored guards handed Ji Tianxing to a white-haired old woman in a black robe and long skirt. After explaining the situation, they left. This black-robed old woman looked to be white-haired. Her body was as thin as a bamboo pole and her skin was as dry as tree bark. Her entire body was shrunk in the black robe. Only a pair of turbid green eyes could be seen. She looked somewhat sinister and strange. However, Ji Tianxing could feel that the old woman's aura was strong and mysterious. She was a martial sage. The old woman was the pavilion elder who guarded the divine book chambers. She was also the second guardian of the vast heaven pagoda. Her status was similar to that of the great guardian. When she found out that Ji Tianxing was punished by Juju to clean up the divine book chambers, a glint of light flashed past her eyes. She arranged a secret room for Ji Tianxing to stay in and let him settle down. Chapter 1510. Although the Divine Book Pavilion is the core of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and there are over 18 million ancient books and records stored within, but cleaning the Divine Book Pavilion is an extremely easy task. Normally, very few people enter the Divine Book Pavilion, and this place is protected by an array, so it is impossible for dust to accumulate here. The second guardian's voice was deep and hoarse, as he slowly explained the situation to Ji Tianxing. Normally, you just stay in the secret room, and don't bother about those books. Go there every day to check which books are not placed properly, and just place them properly. If some books are too old and need to be repaired or rewritten, you can bring them to me. When she spoke, she was like an old bellows, as if she could stop breathing at any time, and occasionally she would cough a few times. Ji Tianxing listened quietly, and when she finished, he opened his mouth to ask, "If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave." "Wait a moment." The second guardian waved his withered hand, and warned in a low voice, "The Divine Book Pavilion is divided into 2 levels, and you can only move around the 5th level. Without my permission, you cannot enter the 6th level." Ji Tianxing knew that the 6th level definitely hid important secrets, or top-secret techniques, so he could not casually enter. He nodded his head to show that he understood, and cupped his hands to bid farewell to the second guardian, before turning around and returning to the secret room. The second guardian looked at his departing figure, and a strange glow flashed across his muddy old eyes. This kid was actually punished by the young highness. Seems a little interesting. She had guarded the Divine Book Pavilion for over 1,000 years, and had long been used to this kind of quiet and dull life. Darkness and loneliness had accompanied her for many years, causing her to grow old, and there was not the slightest bit of life in her body. In these 1,000 years, she had spent 90% of her time alone, hiding in the darkness. Now that someone had come to the Divine Book Pavilion, and had to stay here for half a year. In the next few months, she should not be lonely and dull. In reality, it was not that Ji Tianxing was not interested in the Divine Book Pavilion. At this moment, the things that had happened before kept replaying in his mind. He only wanted to enter the secret room as soon as possible, and quietly think for a while. There were no furnishings in the gloomy secret room, only a futon made of spiritual jade. Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged on the praying mat and closed his eyes to meditate. Soon, he calmed his mind. When his mind and spirit became one, the image appeared in the depths of his soul. They were still high up in the sky, at the peak of the vast sea of clouds. Martial god Taihao and Kenshin stood proudly in the air and talked to one another. At this moment, there was nothing to disturb him. The image in the depths of his soul was incomparably clear. Every glance and action of martial god Taihao and Kenshin was clearly reflected in his soul. He watched the scene of the two deities sparring again, memorizing their expressions, reactions, and movements, as well as every word they said. After a long time, the soul image dissipated. He frowned and muttered to himself, "The sword is in the heart, in the world, outside the void, but not in the hand." These were Kenshin's exact words. With these words, Kenshin was able to convince martial god Taihao and make him bow his head and admit defeat. However, Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a long time, but he still couldn't understand the meaning of these words. He also couldn't understand why martial god Taihao would willingly admit defeat and respect Kenshin so much after hearing these words. Maybe my cultivation is too low. I haven't reached the martial god realm, so I can't understand the mysteries behind these words. He firmly remembered Kenshin's words and put this matter aside for now. Then, he remembered the statue of martial god Taihao in the temple. Behind the lifelike statue, the wall was carved with pictures of mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, and stars. At the time, he saw with his own eyes that there was a very special picture on the wall. The picture was as big as a wash basin. The lines were simple and abstract, as if they contained some deep meaning. He carefully pondered for a while and came up with an answer in his mind. That special and mysterious picture, is it a kind of seal that represents Divine Lord Taihao's status and authority? In the world of martial arts, many powerful organizations, empires, and aristocratic families had their own emblems and seals to show their strength and noble status. A martial god like Divine Lord Taihao, one of the three overlords of the Shunwu continent, would definitely have a corresponding seal. When he thought of this, he immediately recalled the ancient book he had found in the imperial palace before leaving the Tianxian continent. At the end of the ancient book, there was also a mysterious seal. He compared that mysterious seal with martial god Taihao's seal and confirmed that they were not the same. What does the seal in that ancient book mean? Which organization does it represent? Ji Tianxing was full of doubts, but after thinking for a while, he came up with a solution. Right, this is the Divine Tome Pavilion, and it has a collection of more than 10 million ancient books. According to the second protector, the ancient books here not only record all kinds of divine techniques, but also the history and secrets of the Shunwu continent over the past 10,000 years. I'll go to the Divine Tome Pavilion to look for information. Perhaps I can find some information about that seal. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing stood up and walked out of the secret room. He arrived at the 5th level of the Divine Tome Pavilion and looked at the thousands of neatly arranged bookshelves with an expectant gaze. There were more than 5,000 bookshelves in the spacious and bright hall, and they were divided into 5 different areas according to their categories. Some areas were filled with books on cultivation methods, some were filled with books on medicine and pills, and some were filled with books on the Tao of formations. He found the area that stored the history books and biographies and sat down cross-legged on the ground. He circulated his energy and released his divine sense, enveloping hundreds of bookshelves. There were more than 1 million books in this area, and flipping through them with one's eyes was definitely a huge undertaking. Using his divine sense to read was undoubtedly the fastest method. Time quickly passed, and before he knew it, a day had passed. Throughout the day, he had used his divine sense to read more than 100,000 books, absorbing a vast amount of words and knowledge. This allowed him to gain a deeper understanding of the Shunwu continent's words and history. His greatest gain was finding out the origin of that mysterious seal, as well as information and deeds related to Kenshin. As for the mysterious mark, it wasn't a secret at all. This was because that mysterious seal was the insignia of one of the 3 overlords of the Shunwu continent, the Luo Shui martial god. After understanding this point, Ji Tianxing's doubts were easily resolved, and a huge rock that had been hanging in the air was lifted. It's actually the Luo Shui martial god's seal, which means that the prefecture lord is working for the Luo Shui martial god. Since the prefecture lord brought Yarrow Yarrow to the Shunwu continent, he must have sent her under the Luo Shui martial god. Chapter 1511. Ji Tianxing had managed to find out Yun Yarrow's whereabouts with just a few clues. Although he could not see Yun Yarrow for the time being, he believed that there would be results in half a year. In this half a year, what he needed to do was to frantically increase his strength. When he had checked the mysterious imprint, he had used his consciousness to scan hundreds of thousands of ancient books. These books recorded the history of Shunwu continent, as well as the events of the past few thousand years. There were thousands of history books that mentioned Kenshin's deeds and news. Ji Tianxing calmed down and recalled the contents of these books. He quickly sorted out his thoughts. He also had a clearer understanding of the sword god's life and the various legends and deeds he had done. 1,580 years ago, a mysterious white-robed youth had appeared on the Shunwu continent. At that time, he had been a nobody, and he had been alone. He wore a white robe and a pair of cloth shoes, and he held an ancient, pitch-black sword as he walked the world. No one knew where he had come from, and no one knew where he had gone. His cold arrogance and loneliness seemed to have been innate, making it impossible for anyone to approach him. His first battle was the battle that had made him famous. The top youth genius of the Misty Flow Empire, a powerhouse at the 9th level of the primordial spirit realm, had been defeated by a single sword strike at the peak of the imperial city. His unfathomable and transcendent swordsmanship caused many experts to exclaim in admiration. In a short 3 years, the white-robed youth had appeared in a neighboring country. 2 Tribulation Realm powerhouses had led many primordial spirit powerhouses to besiege him. On Moonset Peak, he had single-handedly killed more than 10 primordial spirit powerhouses with his sword, and he had even destroyed the souls of the 2 Tribulation Realm powerhouses. It was said that at that time, his sword light had traversed 15,000 kilometers, and his sword had been like the moon splitting the heavens. From then on, the white-robed youth had gained a name, and he was known as Kenshin. In the following 30 years, Kenshin was like a traveler, crossing over a dozen empires. The name Kenshin had attracted countless criticisms, as well as attacks for no reason. However, he had crossed over the territories of the 3 divine kingdoms and fought with various powerhouses. He had fought thousands of times, but he had never been defeated. From 3rd Tribulation Martial Lords to 5th Tribulation Martial Lords to 9th Tribulation Martial Lords, they were all defeated by his sword. He had once been surrounded and heavily injured, his blood staining the sky. However, he would rather break than submit and press forward courageously. 30 years later, when he arrived at the martial holy land of the Luo River Divine Nation, he was already a martial saint. From then on, people were surprised to find that the sword in Kenshin's hand had disappeared. No matter how strong his opponent or enemy was, he was always empty-handed. The mysterious black sword would only appear out of thin air at the critical moment of his battle with the enemy and defeat him with a single strike. Legend has it that Kenshin was carefree and unrestrained throughout his life. He was not bound by anyone and never owed anyone favors. After he had reached the martial sage realm, he had set up a training ground at the peak of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and used the 9 heavens wind lightning flame to practice his swordsmanship. Furthermore, he had announced that he was inviting martial saints from all over the world to challenge him. In just 20 years, he had defeated more than 30 martial sages and had never been defeated. Kenshin's name was like the sun in the sky, and he had intimidated the entire Shunwu continent. He was second only to the 3 martial gods. However, for some reason, when his reputation was at its peak, he had disappeared for 20 years. No one knew where he had gone during those 20 years. However, when Ji Tianxing saw this information and combined it with the history he had learned in the Tianxian continent, he immediately guessed the answer. During those 20 years, Kenshin had gone to the Tianxian continent to suppress the ancient demon emperor. Many years later, in a secret realm of the Luo River Divine Nation, a divine light that covered the sky lit up. Half of the divine nation was covered by this light, and it did not disappear for 3 months. According to the historical records, this divine light was a phenomenon of a martial saint becoming a martial god. Not long after, a piece of shocking news spread from the Luo River Divine Nation's divine palace. Kenshin had returned. Moreover, Sword God and Luo Shui Martial God had fought in the 9 heavens and defeated Luo Shui Martial God in 3 moves. After that, Kenshin had even enlightened Martial God Luo River, allowing him to comprehend on the spot and reach the realm of great perfection in his divine art. When this news spread, the entire Shunwu continent was in an uproar, and Kenshin's name became well known. In the following years, it was said that Martial God Taihao and Martial God Tianjue had challenged Kenshin. However, without exception, they were all defeated by the Sword God in less than 3 moves. From then on, Kenshin had become the undisputed #1 powerhouse, and he had even surpassed the three martial god. After all, in the tens of thousands of years since ancient times, no one had been able to go from the primordial spirit realm to the martial god realm in just 80 years. This was the number one monster that had never been seen before and would never be seen again. However, after Kenshin had reached the martial god realm, he had not stayed in the Shunwu continent for too long. 1,500 years ago, Kenshin had ascended from the peak of Tianzhu Mountain and left the continent for the higher realms. After this news spread, the world's powerhouses were once again in an uproar, and they all worshipped Kenshin to the extreme. The three martial gods and countless martial saints were even searching for the things that Kenshin had left behind, hoping to find a way to ascend to the higher realms. The historical records clearly stated that after the War of the Gods had ended in ancient times, this world had been sealed by the gods. The 5 continents had been isolated, and the heavens and earth had been sealed by invisible shackles, preventing anyone from ascending to the higher realms. In the 30,000 years since ancient times, several martial gods had appeared on the Shunwu continent. However, those martial gods had been restricted by the heavens and earth seal, and they had never been able to ascend. In the end, they could only die of old age, turning into withered bones and yellow earth, leaving behind endless regrets. Kenshin's successful ascension had brought hope to the entire world, and it had also allowed the powerhouses of the world to see the light. However, countless powerhouses had searched through everything related to Kenshin, but they had not been able to find any clues about how to ascend to the higher realms. Everyone had despaired, and in the end, they could only give up regretfully. For the next 500 years, the three martial gods had used some special methods to obtain information about Kenshin. It was said that Kenshin had explored the higher realms and reached the pinnacle of martial arts, becoming the ruler of the astral river. However, 1,000 years ago, a shocking piece of news had spread throughout the Shunwu continent. Kenshin had fallen. Kenshin, who had once been able to unleash a single sword beam and intimidate 30 nations with his sword chi, had actually fallen. When the news spread, the heavens and earth shook, and millions of warriors knelt on the ground and wept. Countless powerhouses were sad. In outer space, countless stars fell like raindrops, and this continued for 3 days and 3 nights. On the Shunwu continent, dark clouds covered the sky and did not disperse for 7 days. The most dazzling powerhouse had fallen, and the legend of the Way of the Sword had vanished. Kenshin's life story had come to an end, and Ji Tianxing gathered his thoughts and sighed with a heavy heart. In a short 80 years, he went from the primordial spirit realm to the martial god realm, the first person to ascend in 30,000 years, the ruler of the astral river. Chapter 15:12. Time passed silently. The following month passed in complete silence. Only Ji Tianxing and the second enforcer remained in the Divine Tome Pavilion. The second enforcer was nowhere to be seen, either napping in the darkness or resting with his eyes closed. The two rarely met, nor did they speak to each other. The entire Divine Tome Pavilion was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. During this month, Ji Tianxing remained on the 5th floor of the Divine Tome Pavilion, not taking a single step out. He did not cultivate, but instead flipped through the ancient books on the various bookshelves. With his powerful perception and photographic memory, he quickly learned the Shunwu continent's language and knowledge, as well as its history and geography. In just a month, he had read more than 300,000 books and scrolls. He understood the history of the Shunwu continent, the origins and situation of the 3 divine kingdoms, and the rise and fall of the various empires. He even knew the territories of the 10 or so Lian-er empires, as well as the famous mountains and cities within their borders. The ancients once said that reading 10,000 books was like walking 10,000 miles. Ji Tianxing remained in the Divine Tome Pavilion, not taking a single step out. In just a month, he had read more than 300,000 books, and it was as if he had traversed the entire Shunwu continent. This feeling of knowing the world and reaping bountiful rewards left him in a good mood. It would also be of great help to his future plans. At the very least, he would know where the Luoshui Divine Kingdom was and where the sacred land of martial arts was. If he left the Clear Sky Pagoda and went to the Luoshui Divine Kingdom to find Yun Yarrow, which route should he take? Early in the morning, Ji Tianxing stood in front of the bookshelves as usual, quietly flipping through the books. The ancient black book in his hands was called Travels to the North, and it contained some records about the Pillar of Heaven. Just as he was engrossed in reading, a thin figure wrapped in a black robe silently appeared beside him. Under the loose black robe, half of the person's shriveled old face was revealed. She had a lock of white hair and a pair of turbid green eyes. It was none other than the black-robed old woman, the second protector. She glanced at the ancient book in Ji Tianqing's hand and couldn't help but frown. She opened her mouth and said, "Kid, for the past month, you've been reading books without sleep or food. This is a good thing. But, why don't you read all those supreme martial arts and secret skills? Instead, you read those useless history books and travel books all day long." Ji Tianqing was awakened by her voice. He turned to glance at her and nodded in greeting. Seeing his calm and indifferent look, the second guardian was a little angry. He said in a low voice, "Do you know how many God's disciples and experts dream of entering the holy land of martial arts? There are millions of books on the bookshelf. You just have to pick a few to cultivate and it will benefit you for life. You little brat, you've wasted the young highness' good intentions and cultivation. You're actually so ignorant and ignorant. You're really disappointing." Her voice was low and hoarse. She looked at Ji Tianqing with eyes full of disappointment, as if she expected better from him. Ji Tianqing slowly closed the black ancient book and raised his eyebrows as he looked at the second guardian. He pointed at the bookshelves that stored the cultivation method manuals and asked, "Second guardian, are you asking me to read those cultivation method manuals?" "Humph, you know the answer. You're really a rotten wood that can't be carved." The second guardian looked angry and snorted with displeasure. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said indifferently, "Those cultivation method manuals are all mediocre. There's no need to look at them." "What?" The second guardian frowned and stared at him. A touch of anger flashed in his sharp eyes. "What an arrogant kid. You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. It's a pity that the young highness' efforts have gone down the drain." In the second guardian's view, Ji Tianqing was not only a piece of rotten wood, but also an idiot who didn't know what was good for him. She didn't want to argue with Ji Tianqing. She just felt that it was not worth it for the young princess. However, she didn't think that Ji Tianqing was telling the truth. The books in the Divine Book Pavilion were indeed worthless to him. There was no need to waste time looking at them. Compared to the Heavenly Book Pavilion in Kenshin's tomb, how could the books here be considered worthless? They were simply rubbish. In this Divine Book Pavilion, the only books that Ji Tianqing found useful were the history books and geographical travel notes. After a moment of silence, the second guardian's anger gradually subsided. She said coldly, "Just now, a guard came to report that the envoy of the White Knight Empire had escorted a batch of books to the foot of Mount God Bestowment. You immediately rush down the mountain to receive the books from the White Knight Empire and bring them back to the Divine Book Pavilion." Ji Tianqing had already stayed in the Divine Book Pavilion for a month. He knew where the 10 million books came from. The 6 empires had been collecting all kinds of books to offer to the Clear Sky Pagoda regularly. After countless years of accumulation, the books in the Divine Book Pavilion could reach such a scale. "Okay." Ji Tianqing put down the black ancient book, cupped his hands to the second guardian, and turned to leave. He calmly left the Divine Book Pavilion, walked out of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and flew down Mount God Bestowment. He knew that Mount God Bestowment was the holy land of martial arts of the Clear Sky Kingdom. It was also the place where martial god Clear Sky taught. The people of the 6 empires could not casually approach this holy land. Without the permission of the Clear Sky Pagoda, no one could ascend Mount God Bestowment. Otherwise, it would be an affront to the authority of the Divine Master and would be severely punished. The envoy of the White Knight Empire could only wait at the foot of Mount God Bestowment. He was not qualified to ascend the mountain. At the foot of the steep Mount God Bestowment, there was an open space with a radius of 10,000 feet. This open space was relatively flat, and the ground was paved with white marble, forming a small square. There was a huge stone tablet erected in the square, and the words Mount God Bestowment were engraved on it. In addition, there was a line of small red words on the stone tablet. It said, "Holy Land of Martial Arts, no trespassing." Usually, if the warriors and commoners of the 6 empires wanted to make a pilgrimage to Mount God Bestowment, They would come to this square to pay their respects to Mount God Bestowment. At this moment, there were two majestic middle-aged men in black armor in the square. Both of them were burly and had a dignified aura. They were dressed like generals. The man on the left had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He was at the 9th level of the Essence Soul realm. The man on the right had a thin face. His eyes flickered with a sharp aura. His strength was at the 1st level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm. The two of them stood side by side in the square, looking up at the sea of clouds above. Their expressions were grave. While waiting, the two of them were secretly discussing through voice transmissions. "General Du, we are under the Sage Emperor's orders. We are taking the opportunity of paying tribute to the book collection to come to the Clear Sky Pagoda to find Ji Tianxing. We are waiting for an opportunity to snatch the burial of Heaven's sword. This plan was originally flawless, but we can't even ascend Mount God Bestowment. What should we do? Deputy General Li, don't be anxious. This is a holy land of martial arts. We cannot be rash. It doesn't matter even if we can't enter. We have already gotten a guard to send a transmission jade slip to Songjianyu." Chapter 1513. The morning sun slowly rose to the sky. General Du and Deputy General Li waited in the square for 2 hours, but no one came to receive the book. Both of them were a little anxious, but because of the order, they could only wait patiently. Not long after, a white figure suddenly flew out of the sea of clouds halfway up the mountain. It was a young man in a white robe, flying in the wind and landing from Mount God Bestowment. Seeing the white-robed young man appear, Deputy General Li was relieved and said with relief, "General Du, that person should be here to receive the tribute. When we hand in the tribute, the task will be completed." General Du nodded and said, "After handing in the tribute, we will hide under Mount God Bestowment and wait for that guy to appear. It is said that the other two empires also know about the news of the Sword of Burial of Heaven, and they seem to be secretly moving and sending people here. At that time, things will be very tricky." Deputy General Li had been looking up at the sky, watching the white-robed figure getting closer and closer. Suddenly, he frowned, and a flash of light flashed in his eyes. He asked, "General Du, look at that white-robed young man, why does he look so familiar?" "Familiar?" General Du was stunned for a moment. He fixed his eyes on the white-robed young man in the sky, and suddenly his face changed. "He does look familiar. This person's figure, appearance and style of clothing are a bit like Ji Tianxing." As General Du said, a white light flashed in his palm, and a picture scroll appeared. In the picture scroll was a white-robed young man, holding a dark and mysterious sword. It was Ji Tianxing and the Sword of Burial of Heaven. General Du glanced at the picture, and then looked up at the white-robed young man in the sky, and a flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. "It's really him. Great, God is really helping me. I didn't expect that the person who came to receive the tribute was Ji Tianxing. It's really a case of searching high and low for something, and finding it without any effort." As he said this, a white light flashed in his palm, and the picture scroll was put away. Deputy General Li was also very excited, and he asked, "General Du, should we do it directly or after handing in the tribute?" General Du sneered inwardly and warned him with a sound transmission, "Don't worry. Hand in the tribute first. After confirming his identity, you can snatch the sword." Deputy General Li hesitated and asked in a rather worried manner, "But we've come as envoys. If we directly take action and the matter is exposed, won't we cause trouble for the Saint Emperor?" General Du was startled for a moment and said in a cold tone, "Let's seize the sword first. If he wants to die, then we'll kill him. Anyway, he is just a candidate of a God's disciple. When the time comes, there will be no evidence. If we don't act today, we won't have another chance in the future." Hearing this, Deputy General Li no longer hesitated and made up his mind. Not long after, Ji Tianxing descended from the sky and landed on the square. He stood in the field expressionlessly and looked at General Du and Deputy General Li indifferently. The two of them hurriedly went up to Ji Tianxing and stood in front of him. They put on a respectful posture and bowed. "The envoy of the White Knight Empire is here to deliver the tribute under the orders of the Holy Emperor. May I ask if this young master is here to deliver the tribute?" "Yes." Ji Tianxing glanced at the two of them and nodded slightly, present the tribute." General Du quickly took out a black ring from his sleeve and handed it to him respectfully. "Young master, there are more than 7,000 books in this ring, including 2,000 volumes of alchemy books, 3,000 volumes of secret methods, and more than 1,000 volumes of array diagrams." General Du looked at Ji Tianxing with a smile and introduced the number of tributes to him. However, Ji Tianxing was not interested in this. He said with an indifferent expression, "Thank you for your trouble. Please go back." After that, he put away the black ring and turned to leave. "Wait!" General Du shouted and said, "Please tell us your name and let us know who the tribute is delivered to. It will be convenient for us to go back and report to the Saint Emperor." Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing said his name and flew to the sky without looking back. He was about to leave. After confirming Ji Tianxing's identity, General Du did not hesitate and immediately attacked. A golden light flashed in his palm and a dark golden sword appeared. He waved the sword at Ji Tianxing without any explanation. Swoosh! The incomparably sharp sword light instantly streaked across the sky and ruthlessly slashed at Ji Tianxing's back. Boom! In the muffled sound, the golden light splashed and Ji Tianxing was sent flying by the sword light. The white robe on his back had a large hole torn open by the sword light, revealing a shallow bloodstain that seeped with blood. Fortunately, his physical defense was strong and he was suddenly attacked, but he only suffered a minor injury. If it was an ordinary 5th-level Essence Soul Master, he would have been cut in half on the spot. The sudden change made Ji Tianxing's face change dramatically. He turned around and looked at General Du and Deputy General Li, his eyes emitting a cold light. "You are courting death," he shouted angrily and immediately stabilized his body and stopped at the edge of the square. Swoosh! A black light flashed in his right hand and the sword of burial of heaven appeared in his hand, emitting a cold and powerful aura. "Ji Tianxing, if you know what's good for you, hand over the sword of burial of heaven and I can spare your life." General Du growled with a murderous look. Ji Tianxing heard and was shocked. "These two know about the sword of burial of heaven? And they want to snatch my sword?" Before he could think carefully, General Du and Deputy General Li had rushed in front of him. The two of them attacked him from the left and right, waving their swords and slashing out sword light that covered the sky and earth. Hundreds of crisscrossing sword light not only contained the power to destroy heaven and earth, but also flashed with traces of purple lightning. This was the proof of a Tribulation Realm Master. Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and looked serious. The mana in his body also burst out crazily. Dharma body of heaven and earth. He used his secret skill and drew the power of heaven and earth within 1,000 miles to condense an oval-shaped 5-colored shield to protect himself. The sword light that descended from the sky slashed the shield fiercely, causing a loud catcha-catcha sound to ring out. In the blink of an eye, the 5-colored shield was smashed and dissipated on the spot. Ji Tianxing was also hit by dozens of sword light and was sent flying into the valley thousands of feet away. His Heaven and Earth Dharma body secret skill was a secret skill with strong defensive power. Even a 7th or 8th tier Essence Soul Realm Master might not be able to defeat it. But General Du's strength had reached the Tribulation Realm. Deputy General Li, who was slightly weaker, also had the strength of a 9th tier Essence Soul Realm Master. The difference in strength between the two parties was too great. They were not at the same level at all. Ji Tianxing was only sent flying and suffered minor injuries. This was enough to shock and disbelief the two of them. Damn brat, he's actually quite capable. He only has the strength of an Essence Soul Realm Master, but he can withstand 2 of our attacks and not die. This is incredible. Cut the crap. Let's end this quickly and snatch the sword in his hand as soon as possible. General Du and Deputy General Li secretly communicated with each other through voice transmission. Then, they unleashed their full strength and rushed toward Ji Tianxing with murderous intent, besieging him with all their might. They knew very well that they were at the foot of Mount God Bestowment. The commotion caused by the two parties fighting would quickly alert the golden armored guards. Chapter 15:14. Ji Tianxing was sent flying 10 miles away, leaving the square and falling into the valley. Before he landed, General Du and Deputy General Li rushed over again, waving their swords and sending out dozens of sword auras, enveloping his figure. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing used the spirit concealment step, and his figure disappeared instantly. He passed through the gaps between the sword auras and flew 10 miles away. However, General Du used the Heaven's Eye secret technique and immediately detected his tracks, and chased after him with his sword. Soaring Dragon of the Sky. General Du unleashed all of his power, waving his sword and sending out a sky full of golden light, which condensed into 200-meter-long golden light dragons, charging towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's face was grim. He waved the Burial of Heaven's sword with all of his strength, thrusting out 7 dazzling sword auras. 7-star sword. The 7 blazing white giant swords, surrounded by violent lightning, pierced towards the 2 golden light dragons. Bang 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 bang. With a series of muffled explosions, the golden light dragons and the sword auras exploded at the same time, turning into fragments that covered the sky and earth. The loud noise reverberated in the valley. The violent shockwave wrapped around the fragments, fiercely hitting the mountain walls and the ground. The ground was blasted open with a radius of more than 10 miles, and the surrounding mountain walls also cracked open with huge cracks. Ji Tianxing was once again sent flying 10,000 meters away, and before he could stabilize his body, Deputy General Li attacked from the side again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Dozens of sharp sword auras all pierced Ji Tianxing. His magical power shield immediately collapsed, and his whole body was also thrown out, crashing heavily into the mountain wall. A large crater was created on the mountain wall, and spider web-like cracks appeared, bursting out dust into the sky. Without waiting for him to recover, General Du and Deputy General Li rushed over again with murderous intent. The two of them wanted to use the most violent attacks to kill Ji Tianxing in the shortest time possible and take away the Burial of Heaven sword. Ji Tianxing was beaten back, and could only rely on the golden rock wings, the Burial of Heaven sword, and various secret techniques to resist the attacks of the two. However, the 3 of them did not know that there were 2 sharp eyes secretly staring at them. They were 2 black-clothed and bronze-masked powerhouses. They were hiding in a valley about 15 kilometers away. The 2 of them hid in a cluster of rocks, using a special secret technique to merge with the rocks, making it impossible for people to detect them. The 2 of them stared at the battle between Ji Tianxing and the other 2, and talked to each other through voice transmission. Those 2 guys claimed to be envoys of the White Knight Empire, using the opportunity of tribute, forcibly snatched the Burial of Heaven sword. They are really too arrogant. The thin black-clothed man asked the burly old man beside him, Wang Duozhu, aren't those 2 guys afraid of being exposed and bringing trouble to the White Knight Empire? The black-clothed man called Wang said in a playful tone, the Burial of Heaven sword is the first magic sword in the world, a treasure that countless strong men dream of. The White Knight Holy Emperor must have given a death order to let those 2 guys snatch the Burial of Heaven sword no matter what. Isn't our Lord Thousand Snow Holy Emperor the same? She wants us to snatch the Burial of Heaven sword at all costs, even by fair means or foul. The skinny black-clothed man asked anxiously, we have been lurking here for more than 20 days, and it's not easy to wait for Ji Tianxing to appear. We must not miss this opportunity. Wang, I think Ji Tianxing can't hold on any longer. When should we make a move? Deacon Sun, don't worry. Let Ji Tianxing and those 2 guys fight until both sides are injured. Then, we'll sit back and reap the benefits. Division leader Wang's tone was filled with treachery. Deacon Sun was shocked and whispered in disbelief, both sides are injured. How is this possible? Even if Ji Tianxing has the Burial of Heaven sword in his hand, it's impossible for him to beat those 2. Wang shook his head gently and said in a firm tone, Ji Tianxing is the first genius of the Chu Yun Empire, his strength must be extraordinary. Moreover, the Burial of Heaven sword is Kenshin's sword, how can it only have this little power? Be patient and watch. Just as division leader Wang finished speaking, a heaven-shaking explosion suddenly came from the valley 15 kilometers away. A giant golden sword over 10,000 feet tall suddenly appeared and slashed viciously at Deputy General Li with a terrifying might. Deputy General Li was sent flying by the giant sword on the spot, vomiting blood as he flew 10 miles away, and smashed into the valley. The sudden change also startled General Du, and his face was full of disbelief. Ji Tianxing. You actually... How is this possible? Ji Tianxing stood in the sky with ragged clothes and disheveled hair, casting a spell to control the primordial spirit golden sword that was thousands of feet high. He stared at General Du coldly and shouted in a cold voice, "You too, as the envoys of the White Knight Empire, how dare you besiege and kill a candidate of the God's disciple at the foot of Mount God Bestowman? Aren't you afraid that the divine Lord Tai Hao will punish the White Knight Empire if this matter is exposed?" General Du held the sword in his hand, and his whole body was surrounded by electric light. He shouted in a contemptuous tone, "Ji Tianxing, don't flatter yourself. You're just a candidate of the God's disciple, and it's no big deal to kill you. The Divine Lord will never care about such a trivial matter, so how can he punish you? If you don't hand over the burial of Heaven sword, you'll definitely die." As General Du spoke, his whole body surged with electric light, and the phantom of a giant beast that was thousands of feet high appeared behind him. The giant beast looked like a rhinoceros, but it only had one leg, and the two curved horns on its head were surrounded by purple electric dragons. This was General Du's primordial spirit Dharma Laksana, the legendary thunder beast Kuei Ox. His primordial spirit Dharma Laksana was very special, and it could control thunder and lightning. This was very rare, and countless strong men in the Tribulation Realm were envious and in awe. General Du made a Taoist gesture with both hands, and the giant phantom of the Kuei Ox immediately condensed a huge ball of electric light, which locked onto Ji Tianxing's primordial spirit Dharma Laksana. "Are you going to hand it over or not?" General Du shouted angrily with a murderous look. Ji Tianxing also activated the giant golden sword with all his strength, and tit-for-tat with General Du he shouted in a deep voice, "You're delusional. Then go to hell." General Du roared angrily. The giant phantom of the Kuei Ox immediately released the ball of electric light with a radius of thousands of feet, and fiercely bombarded Ji Tianxing. Boom! In an instant, the giant ball of electric light bombarded Ji Tianxing's primordial spirit golden sword, and his figure was drowned. However, a scene that stunned General Du appeared. The power of thunder that he was proud of did not hurt Ji Tianxing. Instead, it burst into electric arcs all over the sky, and was quickly swallowed by the golden sword. After the dazzling purple light dissipated, Ji Tianxing's figure appeared, and he was unscathed. He stared at General Du coldly, and said in a contemptuous tone, "Showing off your slight skill in front of an expert." The next moment, he waved his hand and threw out the sword of burial of heaven, and shouted in a low voice, "Divine sword fusion." Suddenly, the dark and cold sword of burial of heaven expanded to thousands of feet in an instant, and merged with his primordial spirit golden sword.